Good morning, Kalimera. I should say, Kalimera, pedia. Dikanite simera. Little bit of Greek, which perhaps gives you an indication of the direction in which the conversation may go. Early doors this morning. I don't know, how many times does anyone keep count of this? Do you keep count of this? Do you keep count of this? How many times do we actually dance around the same question on the programme at the moment, which is, what are they doing? Why have they done this thing? Whether it's Suella Braverman saying, let's confiscate tents from homeless people. Or, where do you even begin with the list? But Rishi Sunak saying, well, we've got a nice meeting coming up with the Greek Prime Minister. The Greek Prime Minister says, those marbles that for over 100 years we've been calling for the return of, it'd be nice to get them returned. Oh, right, I'm cancelling the meeting. He's like the kid, isn't he? He just is the kid who'd take his ball home if you didn't let him be centre forward every day. That's it, isn't it? We finally got there. It's not Will out of the in-betweeners, the briefcase boy. It's trying to pin down exactly who Rishi Sunak is. He is the boy that would take his ball home if you didn't let him be centre forward every single day. Oh, come on, mate. It's your turn to go in goal. Right, I'm taking my ball home. With his trousers 6 inches too short or whatever. Now, that's deliberate, by the way. I mean, you can say what you like about Rishi Sunak. He can afford a decent tailor. But he is the kid who takes his ball. He's the kid who takes his ball home. I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair because it was 43 years ago. But I have the name in my head right now of the boy that did precisely that and worse when we were at school. In fact, I'm seeing some lads tonight who I haven't seen since 1986. I've got a gig in Manchester tonight, and some of the lads who've reunited on Facebook are coming along to see it. So I wonder if they will remember the name. He ended up in the... Can I say, is this fair? He ended up in the school team because his dad bought a minibus for the school. His dad bought a minibus, so and the reason I still remember that is because I was the one for a while who got bumped out of the team and replaced with someone who was obviously, I wasn't great. I was obviously, the 11th pick in the school in the first 11 or the second 11 it may have been. I don't think it was even the first 11. I was the 11th pick. This lad's dad bought a minibus, and he ended up nicking my place. And he would genuinely, if he wasn't allowed to be centre forward, he would take his ball home in break. 5 minutes after 10, that's who he is. Good Lord, I do love it when that happens. When something just slots into place. What do we call it? It's a penny drop. He's the kid who'd take his ball home if you didn't let him be centre forward. At least that's answer number one to the question that we will dedicate ourselves today. So is anybody keeping count of the amount of times at the moment we find ourselves looking at a member of government doing something we consider to be at the very least odd and at the very most utterly inexplicable, and I come on air and I use lots of long words and I dance around like a peacock for 15 to 20 minutes, and at the end of it, all I've really asked you is, what is he playing at? Why has he done that? Why has she done this? We should make a list, because I that would back my position up better, wouldn't I, if I had a little list? So you've got, pretty much everything Braverman did, but particularly the stuff that wasn't about refugees or immigrants. Why did she announce that she wanted to confiscate tents from homeless people? 0345. Don't ring in on that. I'm just reminding you how often we find ourselves addressing issues such as this. Why won't they sit down with unions, I suppose, is a question. But no, that's not the same. You can answer that. It's the individual acts of, what would you like me to say? What word would you like me to use? Because in terms of fluidity of language and a mild alliteration, individual acts of idiocy has a certain ring to it, doesn't it? It's the individual acts of idiocy undertaken by senior politicians who we presume, and this might be part of this morning's conversation, we presume that they are surrounded by qualified people, high caliber people. This is one of the first things I think we need to get our head around. If you have a look at the caliber of politician currently in the Conservative Party, they're the people that have actually got gigs as MPs. And you look at 30p Leenock or Brendan Clark-Smith or Jonathan Gullis, two of whom at least have had roles within the party, haven't they? Gullis was an education minister for a while, which, say what you like about Boris Johnson, the lad had a sense of humour. But if they can become MPs, imagine the quality of candidate to be a behind-the-scenes advisor. I mean, I presume that if you can write your own name, you're in with a chance of getting a gig as an advisor to Rishi Sunak at the moment. I mean, it is extraordinary how we presume that we have people promoted to positions of influence who have qualifications at least, or credibility at least. And yet clearly they don't. I mean, whoever was sitting in the room with Suella Braverman when she said, let's confiscate tents, I need to give their head. And now we've got Rishi Sunak. So just to be clear about the facts, and I can't really see at the moment a more important question to ask than why has he done this? Why has he done this thing? We would not be talking today about Rishi Sunak or Greece or the Parthenon marbles or Kyriakos Mitsotakis. His entire visit probably would have gone unremarked were it not for Rishi Sunak's petulant response to Mitsotakis reiterating a position that the Greek government has held for at least as long as I've been alive. So why has he done it? Why has he done this? And listen, a lot of you are already texting the word petulance, although Nick's just texted lunacy, which is variety is the spice of life. He's just texted the word petulance. Lots of you are texting the word petulance, but you'd think you'd have I don't call this in private, by the way. In private, it has a slightly different name. But in public, on air, we call it the Wazzock alarm, a nod to my Black Country roots, but also, of course, a reminder that everybody needs somebody in their life who will lean on their shoulder at some point and go, mate, you're being a bit of a Wazzock now. The greatest advice I could give you is to marry your Wazzock alarm. If you happen to find a Wazzock alarm who is both beautiful and brilliant, then marry them immediately, because twinning those 2 roles, 3 roles, 4, however many roles it may be, but the importance of having a Wazzock alarm in both your personal life and your professional life. So I have Wazzock alarms, as you'd expect. I need more Wazzock alarms than the average Wazzock. So that's why I wear headphones in the studio, in a way, because I don't need them anymore. I could just have the speaker up. I can hear you ringing in. I've got a clock over there to my right. Sometimes I misread it. Wazzock alarm goes off. James, it's 10:44, not 11. Oh, yeah, all right. So Wazzock alarm, and sometimes it'll be, whoa, mate, wind your neck in a bit, or you've gone in a bit hard on that. Although that doesn't really happen anymore. I've become so mellow in recent years. Obviously, we've got a dump button. The dump button is the mother of all Wazzock alarms, and that's usually used when you mess up. So even you have a Wazzock alarm when you come onto this programme. If you say something, as someone did earlier this week, I think they said a naughty, or it was late last week, then we can press the button. Adam, who is Keith's deputy, can press the button today, and we will lose a few seconds of the radio show. That's like the nuclear Wazzock alarm. But the rest of the time, I've got Eleanor in my ear. She's a Wazzock alarm. I might have Adam in my ear, being a Wazzock alarm. I say, don't. So where is Rishi Sunak's Wazzock alarm? That's the question, isn't it? So Rishi Sunak is sitting in a room at Downing Street, admiring his own ankles, which is presumably the only reason why he wears his trousers so short. So he's sitting there admiring his ankles, and someone says to him, "Oh, you'll never guess what old Mitsotakis has done." And someone else says, "Well, I presume he's mentioned that the Greek government is quite keen to see the Parthenon marbles return to Athens because A, they've built a museum for it especially, B, George Osborne's been making quite encouraging noises recently, and C, it has literally been the Greek government's position for longer than you have been born, Rishi Sunak." So that's the exchange in Downing saying, "Oh, look what Mitsotakis has done." Well, exactly, yeah, he would, wouldn't he? What with it being the Greek government's position for longer than we've been alive. And Rishi Sunak responds, literally, a grown man, technically, a grown man responds by saying, "Right then, well, I'm cancelling the meeting." Do you think he sat back from the table then and pursed his lips? Do you think he went like this? This only works if you're enjoying the show on YouTube. Do you think he sat back from the table, he went, "Right then, I'm cancelling the meeting"? Like that. I bet he did. And the people around him at that point should really activate the Wazzock alarm, shouldn't they? Someone should go, I mean, but look, by all means, Prime Minister, by all means, make your dissatisfaction clear, Prime Minister. But I think cancelling the meeting makes us look a little, what word would you use if you had to sort of combine sycophancy with diplomacy? Cancelling the meeting makes us look a little, it makes us look a little rash, perhaps a little oversensitive, a little thin-skinned, you know? I I don't think we should cancel the meeting. To which Rishi Sunak responds by going, too late! Texting Mitsotakis, meeting cancelled, stick that in your souvlaki and smoke it, LOL Rishi. And he said, too late, I've already sent the message. Meeting is cancelled, no meeting for the Greek Prime. And obviously he goes and talks to Keir Starmer, and every single newspaper, every single gob on a stick with a radio show are all talking about Rishi Sunak's apparently petulant response to a perfectly pertinent, relevant and well-established position expressed by a foreign prime minister, a foreign leader. Kyriakos Mitsotakis said he was disappointed that the planned bilateral meeting had fallen through, and said that he had been extremely surprised by this decision. He's visiting Britain. They were scheduled for a 45-minute meeting, but late last night, the Greek leader said he had been snubbed. Meeting cancelled, LOL. Mitsotakis' spokesman expressed disappointment and talked of, quite rightly, the very deep history of friendship between the UK and Greece. Here for lots of reasons. Spokesman said topics would include European security. James Cleverly, I think, said yesterday we need to cooperate more with our European partners on things that we've kind of accidentally set fire to while racing headlong over the horizon in pursuit of some mythical sovereignty. There's lots of things they could be talking about. He makes the point, and if you've been to the Parthenon, you'll understand this. It's like chopping the Mona Lisa in half. So the friezes, because technically they're friezes rather than statues. I think you might call them statuary. This is probably not the phone-in. Friezes, and they tell a story in some cases. They're like sort of tableau, and they've been chopped in half. They brought some of them back to Blighty and left some of them in Athens, where at the time of Elgin's removals, there was a case, a heritage case, for saying they'd be better off in the British Museum than they would be here. There's apocryphal tales of Turkish soldiers, Ottoman soldiers using them for target practice. But, the world has turned. There's another bit of this story that never I gets picked up on. And I remember reading, and I must have been in the days before the internet recorded everything, because I have searched and searched and searched for this, and I have never, ever found it. And I know I didn't dream it. It'd be too weird a thing to dream. And it would be in either Tatler or Harper's and Queen. It would be in one of the magazines for toffs, one of the toff magazines that most of us didn't even really know about the existence of until we got a job as a gossip columnist on Fleet Street and had to pore through them looking for the engagement announcements of Lady Arabella Tuffington, Wuffington, Buffington, and George Farquharson Smythe, whose parents were delighted to announce that they'd be getting spliced this Saturday at Do the Boys Castle. And there was a story about the descendants of Elgin. The family name is Bruce, which means they're probably Scottish. The descendants of Elgin, and the journalist very casually dropped into conversation that they've got some of the marbles in their house. So he brought a bunch back. The British Museum got the majority of them, but he kept a few, possibly even the best, because you would, wouldn't you? If you're going to keep some, you'd keep the best ones. I definitely read this. I hope I'm not maligning anyone. You can't libel the dead. But I'm 99.9 recurring % certain that I once read that the family of the descendants of Lord Elgin still had some of the marbles in their own house. I say house, it'd be at least a castle, but in their own gaff. There we go. There's a lovely word that covers all the eventualities of the size and status of the family home. So they still had some in their own gaff, which puts a bit of a dampener on the mealy-mouthed and largely insincere claims that they're better off here than they would be with Johnny Foreigner, or Stavros Foreigner in this case. 17 minutes after 10 is the time. Here is the question I would like you to answer. And think about it, because it's not a question about where should the marbles be. It's not a question about the British Museum or history or imperial legacy. It's not a question about any of those things. It's a very simple question about why Rishi Sunak cancelled a meeting with a foreign leader in this way, in this, I would say, petulant, crass, and profoundly wazzocky way. Why did he do it? What's your theory? I've given you mine. I even did voices and impersonations. Probably best if you don't. But why? Just talk me through what's happened here at the very top, because although it seems like a relatively trivial story, at the very, very, very top of the British government, a fully grown man has just acted in a way that reminds me of nothing more than an 8-year-old boy taking his football home when the rest of us refused to let him be centre forward for the 17th match in succession. Okay? What other interpretation could there be? Or would you like to challenge, add to, or endorse mine? 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 10. Ollie is in Oxford. Many of us have a WASAC alarm, James, but Rishi Sunak has WASAC enablers, including his advisers and much of the right-wing press. It seems that those who go through life never being told no, or that they are wrong about something, or even being questioned, have far fewer WASAC alarms than the rest of us. So that's the question of how it happened, I think. But why did it happen? So you turn to Rishi Sunak after he has sent a text message to Mitsotakis, the Greek Prime Minister, saying, meeting cancelled, meh. And you say, why have you done that, boss? Why have you done that, Prime Minister? What would Rishi Sunak say? This is, I appreciate I'm asking you to really zone in on a specific here, and you're welcome to dance it around a bit like I have. But you say, why have you done that, Prime Minister? And he would say, because... ... because he wouldn't say, because I'm a petulant man-child, would he? Or because I lack WASAC alarms, or because I'm surrounded by idiots and they told me it would be a good idea. You'd say to him, why did you do that? What would he say? 0345 6060 973. Terry is in Cheam. Kalimera, Terry. Di canis.
Kalimera, Polikala.
What would you like to say?
First of all, I'm going to echo your comments earlier. Just how childish this Prime Minister's behaving. I mean, it's an embarrassment. He is an embarrassment. I mean, I've always been a Conservative voter.
Sure.
And I don't think I will be with this guy.
It's funny the things that draw your attention, isn't it? Because, this isn't a policy pronouncement. It's not a particular departure from a position that British governments have held in the past. The Greeks say they're ours and we say they're not. And on it goes. But the cancelling of the meeting just speaks to something a bit more accessible, doesn't it? A bit more human.
When you consider that, if you look at the other items that were on the table for discussion,
yes,
global issues that are really important, that, he's cancelled a meeting on the basis that the Greek Prime Minister wants to once again bring up the issue of the Elgin marbles. But
he didn't even, he brought it up outside the meeting. He could have brought it up at the meeting and Sunak could have said, nah, not today. Yeah, not today,
exactly.
Mate. And on they go. It is just, well, go on then. Well, we can't just all queue up. Well, maybe we can. I'm up for it if you are. We'd all queue up for an hour saying it's pathetic and petulant and another word that begins with P, because I do like my alliterations. But
also, James, where's the argument? The marbles were taken, all right, Greece was under occupation. They were occupied by the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years.
Yes.
And at that time they were taken, but how is that justifiable? They were stolen, basically.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. Lord Byron agreed with you. You get a lot of amateur historians jumping up and down claiming to have a better understanding. You don't understand what it was like at the time. But Lord Byron, who of course is a hero in Greece, he was pretty clear that it was a basic theft. I think did he flog them to the British Museum in the end? It was a private museum that he wanted them for. Imagine that, his own private museum. And then I think did he have an expensive divorce or something like that? So he had to flog them to the British Museum.
Yeah, he sold the marbles at a loss, didn't he?
I think it cost him more to get them here than he got for them. So so if he was here now, and let's be honest, it's never going to happen. But if he was here now and you said to him, but why did you do it, Prime Minister? What do you think he would say?
I don't think he's got. What can he say?
But he must have an idea in his own noggin.
I would like to hear it.
Well, I would too.
I would like to hear what he'd like to say.
Because you can't imagine what it is.
I just think he'd make himself look at an even bigger idiot.
Είναι μπούφος, ναι. Είναι πάρα πολύ μπούφος. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060 973. Prime Minister, why have you done this? Why did you cancel the meeting? Julian's in Marlow. Julian, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that this is basically discussed before. It's just performative exceptionalism.
Yeah, but he's not going to say that, is he? I can tell I'm going to get the hump this hour in a nice way. He's not going to say. If you said to him, "Why have you done it?" What would he say?
Oh, what would he say?
Yeah.
He would say, "Well, it depends who's doing the asking."
Good point. Great point. Yes.
If it's internal, he'll say this plays well to the base that we offended by firing Suella.
Yes.
So that's what he'll say.
We're just going to offend Greece.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And it costs him nothing because it's just performative. There's no legislation that needs to be enacted. There's no need to change any of the state bodies, whatever. It's just cheap.
You could. I mean, in fact, that's a brilliant answer because of the qualification you put in on. It depends who's asking, because he's not going to give an honest answer to everybody, is he? But privately, you say, well, look, we've got to keep people like 30p Lee and Brendan Clark-Smith happy.
Yeah,
so
I'm just going to go. On side.
I'm going to find a foreigner to offend.
Yeah, this is free. It does nothing. It costs us nothing. It doesn't require enacting any laws. Let's just go ahead and do it. And obviously, he'll come up with some word soup for whoever asks in the style of avoiding. What we've got to do is focus on the things that we're doing, and we're really trying. We're really working hard to deliver what's important.
He's got nothing in his diary today. Actually, I've had a look. The only thing in his diary today is chairing a cabinet meeting.
So he's fine for today. Maybe by tomorrow it'll pass, because it's, with all due respect to the Greeks, it's not that important to the British public. Most of us don't care. So this won't even register with the majority of the public. So it's a complete. It's got
loads of coverage. It's got a lot more coverage than it would have done if they just had the meeting. He'd raised whatever points he wanted to raise, and then they'd shaken hands and said, "Yes, Kalo Taxidi."
Again, I think you've mentioned this many times, the client media. This plays well to the right-wing gammon satisfying client media.
That's probably the intention, but I wonder whether probably it does. There he is, good old Rishi, sticking it to the Greeks.
Exactly. There you go.
Thank you, Julian.
So anyway, I hope I've saved you some time on the debate. I think I've nailed that one.
Well, hang on, it sounds like me now. There's always room for more. There is always room for more, Julian, not least because, we could establish whether or not the sort of Gammonati are delighted with this. The Idiot's Corner is open again today. I kept it closed for a couple of hours yesterday because the subject matter was so sensitive. But Idiot's Corner is open again today, and that's usually where we have to go these days for Hotline to Gammon Central. But so far, I've got no Idiot's Corner support for it. Even along those lines of, well, it's good, isn't it, teaching them a lesson. And don't forget that the Greek Prime Minister comes out, and you wouldn't have known this if it wasn't for Sunak's bizarre behaviour. The Greek Prime Minister comes out and says, or his spokesman says, the Prime Minister was looking forward to discussing a range of topics of mutual interest, including the Israel-Gaza conflict, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, climate change, as well as common challenges such as migration and, of course, the Parthenon sculptures. Now, Greece, possibly more than any other European Union country, is the first port of call for refugees and people seeking to become expats. At the very first port of call, any meaningful attempt to address the passage of people who end up here would have to encompass at some point conversation with and deals with the European Union in general and Greece in particular. The idea that a man who talks about little else has passed up or rejected an opportunity to discuss migration with a man who is truly in the eye of that particular storm is measurably absurd. And that list there, the Israel-Gaza conflict, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, climate change, as well as common challenges such as migration. And, of course, the Parthenon sculptures. That's like me talking about myself. There's no way it's not going to happen. A Greek Prime Minister turns up for a meeting with an English Prime Minister. Of course the Parthenon sculptures is going to pop up in conversation. But Rishi Sunak cancelled the conversation. And I wonder whether you can improve on Julian's analysis. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. How do I put this politely? How do I sort of say, are you a raving idiot? Are you impressed by Rishi Sunak's cancellation of a meeting with the Greek Prime Minister because he was asked a question about the Parthenon marbles on the BBC and he answered it with a reference to a position that the Greek government has held since, pretty much since the beginning of the 19th century? Well, since there's been a Greek government, which kicks in a little bit later, but I think it became, it's not law, but whatever the correct word is, official, but you're looking about the early 80s, so a good 45 years ago. And it gets even sillier. So you're looking at the question, you're pretending that the Prime Minister is sitting here. You've resisted the temptation to ask him why his trousers are so short. And you have instead said, why did you cancel this meeting? And he says, well, James, here's the reason why. And the Greek government has now inevitably disputed that there'd been any assurances. So you've got, this is us, the world is watching. This will be a big story. This will be a huge story in Greece, by the way. It'll be absolutely megalo. Para πολύ megalo. Στην Ελλάδα. And they will be laughing at us. This is what I find so frustrating about Brexiters dancing around. It's like playing chess with a pigeon, isn't it? They crap all over the board, knock all the pieces off it, and then dance around pretending that they've won a game. They've made us, countries that would once have looked up to us now laugh at us. Greece being a wonderful example, maybe not have looked up to us, but they just laugh at us now. They point at us and they laugh, they snigger. It's why they don't really cover foreign newspapers on British news programmes. They should do. It give us A, an idea of what the world looks like outside our window, and B, what the world thinks of us. What was it? Would some gift... I can't do the accent because I always sound like a Geordie. Would some gift... It's not gifty. This is Rabbi Burns. Would some gift God give us? I'm translating it into English. Forgive me. Would some gift God give us to see ourselves as others see us? It's a bit like a WASIC alarm, isn't it? If you could see yourself as others see you. So why have you done this thing? The Greeks have now said, of course, there's no agreement that we wouldn't bring up the Parthenon sculptures in a meeting with the Prime Minister. And he sent his text. I quite like, thank you to everybody who's helped me to finesse the Greek equivalent of Johnny Foreigner. It would indeed be Yanni Xenos, I think. So he's sticking it to Yanni Xenos on this occasion. 10:36 is the time. Damien is in Dublin. Why has he done it, Damien?
Hi, James. He's done it as a prank.
He hasn't done it. Yeah. You think?
There we are. You're welcome.
Tell me more.
No, he is. Oh God, he's feeding into this very well-worn narrative established by recent American politics that you're upsetting the right people. This is stuff that gets said every day on your show, I think. But and so therefore, I wasn't going to ring in with it, but. It's kind of government by prank, and why I think it's worth talking about and ringing in is that it's just a little drop in the bucket to remind us all that government doesn't have to be serious.
He's not going to say that, is he?
No, but
so what would he say?
You know what I mean?
What would he say? Why have you done this, mate? You look like an absolute plank.
All he ever says is he begins with, as I said.
As I said, we've got. Let me be clear. Let me be clear. We've got to be getting on with things, and things have got to be got on with.
Yeah. So, which is another way of saying,
stop the boat! Myself. You just shout, stop. They go, why have you done this? Stop the boat! Stop the boat!
Yeah.
Stop the boat!
So, in that way, it's nothing new. But I just.
We're not going to get there. We're not going to get there. We're doing that thing again. We're trying to read the mind of a man who may not have one. It is an occupational hazard at the moment in the context of British politics. And remember, Sunak's the sensible one. Captain Sensible, Rishi Sunak. Why have you done this then? Also, what's the new Foreign Secretary got to say? You remember? Old Davy Cameron, that genius of political strategy? 10:38 is the time. Damien, thank you. David's in Maida Vale. David, what's going on?
I think we're wasting a lot of time and energy on this because
you rang in, mate.
The first thing is it's not really Rishi Sunak's decision anyway, and he's probably looked ahead of time as an intelligent man and thought, how's this meeting going to go down? Nice to meet you. Can you give the marbles back? I mean, is that likely to happen?
You're familiar with the tradition of government leaders from foreign countries coming to this country and meeting our Prime Minister, and there being little of substance to emerge from the meetings. I mean, it's been going on for hundreds of years.
It's a waste of time.
It might be, but that won't be Rishi Sunak's reason for cancelling this one. Otherwise, he would never have another one again, David.
What we need are politicians.
Feel free to completely ignore what I've said and crack on with whatever point it is you think is worth pursuing.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. No, you carry on. You carry on.
What I'm saying to you is, you're on here talking the world out of this, yeah?
Yep.
Why can't we have politicians that are straight up efficient with their words and not waste time?
Well, that's what we don't. So we're having to imagine what he would say if we gave him that opportunity. And if you said, why have you cancelled this meeting? What would he say?
At the end of the day, James, as I said, it's about time politicians say it as it is and get on with it and move on to the next topic. I mean, what do we need to appoint a youth representative or something? At least, we'll get something.
No, this is international diplomacy. He has managed to offend. He's managed to offend an entire country. Why has he done it? Well, they're not going to launch... I hear they've just delivered an enormous wooden horse to Downing Street, so it looks like everything's going to be okay after all.
Right. So there's nothing they can do. So I would tell them no or give it back. End of story.
Yes. Or talk about the situation in Israel and Gaza. Talk about the migration situation that the Greek government is probably better placed to discuss than anything else. Talk about the illegal war in Ukraine. Talk about any number of issues.
Yes, exactly. There are more important issues.
So then why cancel? Why cancel the meeting?
Well, either give it back or tell them no.
Can't just keep repeating yourself. Who do you think you are, Rishi Sunak? Stop the boats!
You know what, James?
Stop the boats!
They need to appoint one of these sort of young youth street representatives to say, yo, bro, you're not having it back. That's the final answer.
Well, unfortunately, we should actually give it back. There's very little defence of the retention of the marbles here. And more people probably would see, well, they'd be in a much better context to be viewed. No one can do it. It's an astonishing situation, apart from the red meat theory, which is... was it Damien in Dublin, Declan in Dublin? Someone whose name began with D in Dublin. I just remember noticing the double D effect before David came on. As pointed out, it is presumably, and Julian in Marlow, I mean, why would you do this? Answer, I've really upset the racist wing of my party by sacking Suella Braverman. I've got to give them something. I've given Estimate Vey a made-up job. No one's really bought that. I've made Brendan Clark Deputy Chairman of the party. It's about 20 now. That's not a figure of speech, by the way. About 20 Deputy Chairmans of the Tory party. It's a rough approximation of reality. And they're still very cross with me. They're still, agitating on the back benches. Basically, Suella Braverman and her mates have taken over from Nigel Farage, but they are in the Tory party. So they keep promising the undeliverable. They keep promising the impossible. There's a question over whether or not they're intelligent enough to realise that what they're calling for is impossible or profoundly undesirable. It is a populist tactic to call for it, the either undesirable or undeliverable, and to pretend that it is both desirable and deliverable. The problem he's got people on his own benches doing it now, not just some grimy heckler doing it from outside the building. So in order to try to appease the hecklers, he has offended the whole of Greece and set a precedent for meetings with future world leaders where they think, is he the guy that takes his job? Do we really want to play football with the guy who takes his ball home if he's not allowed to be centre forward again? Roger is in Mill Hill. Roger, what would you like to say?
James, good morning. Look, one of the attributes we'd expect from our leaders would be diplomacy, at the very least.
You would,
he doesn't have it, clearly. And the thing I'd like to introduce in terms of why, I think it's fear. He's afraid of confrontation. We've seen it so many times with interviews. When he kept talking about his 5 pledges, I think he said it 5 times in one interview. Instead of answering questions, he just repeats the prepared statements. We see it in PMQs. He doesn't answer questions. He's got his script or probably the earphone in his ear.
He hasn't got an earphone in his ear, but I take your point. I take your point. But this would be a private meeting. So it doesn't reach there. It doesn't extend to that because it's a private meeting and the Greek Prime Minister would come out. He wouldn't cause a diplomatic incident by mocking the length of Rishi Sunak's trousers. He'd come out and say, we've had a deep and meaningful conversation, but the future of the Parthenon marbles remains unresolved and yada, 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 ding, ding, ding. So there's no particular embarrassment for Sunak involved in this. So it can't be the usual, it's not the usual obfuscation and hiding, fear of confrontation.
Well, I sort of agree, but I think it's afraid to tackle the issue. He doesn't want the issue to be raised. He's afraid to tackle. He was afraid to tackle Braverman until he had no choice. Yeah. Lee Anderson, and as you say, all the deputies he's now appointed, all of the other posts.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
20 deputies. I mean, that proves your point in a way, doesn't it? It can't upset anyone. So basically, you put your hand up and say, hello, can I be a deputy, please? Yeah, of course you can, Brendan. Fill your boots. There you go, Lee Knock, you can be a deputy. Hang on a minute. I was a deputy before they were a deputy. Can I be senior deputy? Yeah, that'll be next. I bet you 50p. Next thing that happens, he starts appointing senior deputies because the previous deputies have got annoyed about how many new deputies have been appointed by the man who's frightened of saying no to anybody. Oh, wad some power, the gifty gears. There it is. Oh, wad some power, the gifty gears, to see ourselves as others see us. I don't know where that accent came from either. Bizarrely, for a bloke who grew up in Kidderminster, my Greek accent is a lot better than my Scottish accent. But there we go. Roger, Efaristopoli. 10:48 is the time. We haven't really looked at the issue, the broader issue, and I think that was the correct call to take. And we're probably going to run out of time before we can look at the broader issue. But yes, I have enough Greek to know what certain words mean, Lena from Barnet. So I'm not going to say them on the radio and get myself into trouble with Ofcom. What are the Ofcom rules on using foreign swear words? Are they the same if you used a... Do we know? You think they'd be softer if I use a Greek swear word? So because you see what that was there in my ear? That was my Wazzock alarm there going. Because Lena in Barnet has sent me words that I understand, which are quite appropriate for describing Rishi Sunak, but which, if I said on the radio, would run the risk of an Ofcom warning or an Ofcom offence, because certainly if I said that word in English, it would be very much on the naughty list. So, I'm not falling for your wiles, Lena in Barnet. 10:49 is the time. Patrick's in Foon in Denmark. Patrick, what's going on here?
Good morning, James. So, the Greek accent's very good, by the way.
Very stopoli.
So, in answer to your question, the Prime Minister, if asked that question, I think he would start by saying, come on, look, that would be the starting point.
Oh, I think we're going to have to tiny up your phone line a little bit, Patrick. Forgive me, because if it annoys me here with the full weight of global radio's technology on my head, then if you're listening in a transistor in the bath, then it's going to be considerably worse. Jack's in Northwich. Jack, what would you like to say? What do you think's going on?
Morning, James. I have a feeling that I might end up being on Idiot's Corner live on air.
I generally don't put callers in Idiot's Corner because they have at least got the courage to ring in. It's usually confined to people who've texted. But Jack, my friend, there is a first time for everything.
Well, I think, and I know you really don't like dead cat theories, but I genuinely think this is a dead cat theory.
Oh, go on then, because even a stop clock is right twice a day.
This is true. But Michael Gove is giving evidence now at the COVID inquiry. Matt Hancock's going to be doing over the rest of the week, potentially dicey subjects about what decisions they made and how people perceive them, and Rishi Sunak might come under fire for that. But, Rishi Sunak, being the great diplomat that he is, being the great politician that he is, he's probably looked at the situation and thought, OK, what's the best way to distract from this situation? I don't like confrontation, so let's, put the Greek Prime Minister out to pasture. Let's embarrass him. But he wouldn't be, put it this way, if this was a situation where he's going to be talking with, Macron, Schultz, Biden, I don't think he'd actually have the courage to play the same tactics and cancel on them, because in his mind, he's probably thinking, OK, Greece, in his mind, inconsequential EU nation. He wouldn't do that to one of the world's superpowers.
There's no such thing as an inconsequential EU nation. They still don't understand that, do they? It's an EU nation, therefore it's consequential. It's a bloc with shared interests and 600 million people in it. But having said that, I think you're right.
Yeah. I certainly think as well
about that bit. I don't know about the dead feline because I think that it's tomorrow's pay. I mean, we'll be looking at what's happened at the COVID inquiry in the course of today's programme. Although there is an absolutely huge story we have to cover about the Conservative mayoral candidate Susan Hall being a victim of a heinous and almost unbelievable crime in Sadiq Khan's festering sore of a city that is London. We'll be getting onto that a little bit later in the programme. But I'm going to have to insist that everybody sits down and takes an aspirin before we do, because that is a traumatic tale that comes with a huge, huge trigger warning. But all that aside, I think that anything Gove comes out with today is going to get as widely reported probably as it would have done if Sunak hadn't dropped this particular clanger overnight. I really do. And, pulling rank a bit, this is my business.
True.
Isn't it?
I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, but again, I think this is just it's an example of two things. One, our diminishing reputation on the international stage, and two, I think it actually is another example of Sunak's cowardice.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot.
He's not the type of person that likes confrontation, but in his mind, he probably sees, the Greeks as an easy target to bully in the same way a bully would pick on who he sees as the weakest person, because what realistically in these negotiations or discussions could Greece actually do in retaliation that would actually damage UK's interests?
Yeah, well, at some point they'll have a power of veto on whatever treaties it is that we will inevitably enter into in an attempt to undo some of the hideous and ridiculous damage that Brexit has done to us. So actually, diplomatically, it's a slightly more live issue than you allow. But of course, the chances of Rishi Sunak being in the driving seat when that day dawns are slim to disappearing. But I hadn't thought of that angle, actually. You've reminded me that takes us back to the idea of them being inconsequential. Of course they're not inconsequential. Any EU member state can veto absolutely anything that we seek to agree with the bloc at large. But yeah, I mean, that word coward, actually, cowardice, I think at about 10:42 today, cowardice overtook petulance in my inbox. But I don't quite agree. I mean, he is clearly a coward, but you don't need to be particularly courageous to say, well, I've listened to the Greek Prime Minister's representations on the future of the Parthenon marbles, or we'll call them the Elgin marbles because we're a bit sad that way. And we the situation remains unresolved, or the situation remains as it was before. The Elgin marbles are and always shall be British. So, in fact, the red meat argument and the cowardice argument kind of cancel each other out, because the red meat argument would be better served by him having a meeting with Mitsotakis and coming out of it and saying, I told him what's what. I told old Yanni Zenos where to get off. I told him to stick it in his souvlaki and smoke it. We're not giving the marbles back anytime soon. And then you get your gorillas on the back benches, your Jonathan Gullises and your 30p Lennox. They love all that. Yay, great, woohoo, down with foreigners. Whereas in fact he looks weak by taking his ball home after the other lads wouldn't let him be centre forward again for the 17th match in succession. Oh, back to Patrick in Foon, whose phone line defeated us. Where were we, Patrick?
Yeah, I think going back to your original question, I think it would be something like, come on, look. And then he would then just talk about, if we give in to the Greeks, we have complete places in London full of stolen things. We call them museums. And everyone will come looking. We'll open the floodgates. It's just before the election. It's not going to be a vote winner.
No, this doesn't work. I know. I like it. It's a nice little skit, but it doesn't work because the meeting was already scheduled. So the meeting has been cancelled in a petulant or cowardly fashion. And it didn't need to be, because he could have come out and said, yeah, we talked about the Parthenon marbles. I told him nothing's changed and nothing ever will. So on you jog.
And that's why I think Roger, who was on two before me, was correct. It's confrontation. Yeah. Except in this case, the confrontation either comes from the Greek guy himself, or it comes from everybody else who wanted to claim all the stuff that they say is theirs from the museums.
I think we might have a winner, although I have to be honest, it hasn't been directed or sent directly to me. It's from a very funny man called Matt Green, a comedian who I follow on Twitter and also was delighted to see pop up in Doctor Who on Saturday night. But he has done a job. He has imagined exactly what Rishi Sunak would say if we were to ask him why he cancelled the meeting. And he says, we all know, this is Sunak speaking, we all know it was the will of the people to keep the Elgin marbles. That's what we voted for in 2016. And even talking about returning them is an attack on this great nation. Also, possession is 9/10 of the law. Suella told me that, and she was sort of a lawyer. So there I think is perhaps the best answer, that we're going to get, however hard and high we search for a better one. Sensational. John's in Northampton. Thank you, Patrick. John, what would you like to say?
Well, first thing, great show as always. First time caller, long time listener.
Welcome aboard.
But I think I've figured it out.
Go on.
We know that Rishi Sunak does not like being questioned.
Yes.
And he doesn't like being questioned, and there is Google evidence to back this up.
Yes.
In that insecure people struggle with self-worth.
No, they don't. Oops, sorry.
And as a result, they're constantly looking at their surroundings for validation to feel good. The question from Mitsotakis has offended him because he's being questioned.
Yeah, maybe.
So he's taken it as offence. He is insecure, and this is his way of taking back power.
You do see increasingly that evidence of it's more than being thin-skinned, isn't it? As you say, it's a sort of it's thin-skinned coupled with entitlement. It's a genuine resentment. Having
Absolutely.
To explain himself or having to answer.
Narcissist.
Yeah, I don't know if he's a narcissist actually. I think because
maybe self-centered.
Yeah, because John Johnson was such a textbook example of that I don't think we can apply it to anyone else without at least as much evidence. But when I think it was Beth Rigby that pointed out he just wasn't used to losing, and he visibly bridled at this reminder.
Absolutely, but yeah, it's that whole self-centered. I'm the most important person in the room.
And this Greek fella's come along.
He's been told, yeah, exactly that. He's been told all of his life how amazing he is, and he's got people around him that are people telling him how amazing he is, which is why he doesn't have the Wazak alarm in his room.
Or his head. He'll need a Wazak alarm.
Or his head. He is amazing, and how dare he be questioned by this, tiny little Greek.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the problem. Unless he explains himself, then the vacuum into which any explanations can move will persist, will continue to exist. And I think every explanation we've heard today is a combination of plausible and feasible. You've just reminded me of something, John, actually. That I only discovered this when I was writing my book, my new book, and when he was in Southampton and he worked as a waiter. Well, hang on, he worked at a local curry house, and this is often held up, or has been held up in the past, as proof of his real life, real world experience. The owner of the local curry house gave a quote in an interview that I hadn't really seen picked up anywhere else, in which he said, "Well, he wasn't really a waiter. That's a bit low status for him." He was more like me. He was a sort of combination of a greeter and an entertainer. And I thought, are we talking about the same Rishi Sunak? And B, even his holiday jobs are being retrospectively upgraded to a higher status pursuit than the one that he presumably actually did at the time. Have you ever been for a curry and found yourself being welcomed by an 18-year-old entertainer stroke greeter? John, in Northampton?
No, I have been welcomed by a waiter.
We've all been welcomed by a waiter. Thank you, John. I had a lovely time in Northampton last night. That little theatre you've got there, the Royal and Derngate, is an absolutely beautiful venue. 11 o'clock is the time. It is 3 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I will turn your attention next to a story where perhaps my woke credentials are not at their strongest. And I think it might be a failure of understanding. M&S Croquette causes pain in Spain with a mix of meat and grain. Marks and Spencer has become embroiled in a cultural appropriation row over its Spanish paella croquettes. Now, cultural appropriation is something that I do struggle to empathise with fully, and presumably this is part of my what would you call it? Privilege, actually, would probably be the best way to describe it. It's part of my privilege. I can't quite imagine British people. I'm choosing my words quite carefully, but I'm not going to be dancing on eggshells because, at the moment, I don't think that the offence caused is epic, and if it is epic, I'm not sure it's justified. I've got the sort of spectre of Jamie Oliver's jerk chicken bouncing around in the background, which people did get very upset about, and we will no doubt move on to that. But I think the question that we're nudging towards is just how upset could you be by this sort of behaviour? And I'm trying to imagine it from a British point of view, or even an Irish point of view. If you went to France, you do, don't you? All the time you go to foreign countries and they have Irish pubs that don't really have a great deal to do with Ireland. They serve Guinness usually and possibly a stew or something. But the rest of it is just decorate. Is that cult? That's not really cultural appropriation. What would cultural appropriation of a British thing be? How would it work? So you'd have a Yorkshire... I genuinely don't know, actually. There's a question. That can be a nice little side order. Marks and Spencer's has become embroiled in a cultural appropriation row. Yeah, OK, that's a good suggestion. So I've had a Scotch egg that was covered in chorizo meat. And what would you call it? A Spanish Scotch egg? A Scotch-Spanish egg? A Scanish? I have to be careful when I do these portmanteau words live on the radio because I might actually accidentally say something filthy. They are delicious. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that unless you have a very peppery sausage meat on your Scotch egg, then a chorizo Scotch egg is superior to a more traditional Scotch egg, which would be made with Cumberland sausage, I presume, wouldn't it? Or Scottish sausage. Would that be cultural appropriation if you wrapped an egg in chorizo and then battered it? It's a brilliant joke on Twitter yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. There was a headline at the BBC. It said battered smart car pulled over by police. And someone tweeted, the Scottish have gone too far this time. So I don't need to explain that joke. I think it got 30,000 likes. And you just thought, I followed the bloke who tweeted it as a consequence. I just thought, that's such a perfect joke. Because you don't even have to look at it twice. It just catches you in the windpipe almost. You're so busy laughing. You're still breathing when you start laughing and you end up... It's such a good joke. So I'm not... maybe I am actually going to nudge you towards the idea that there's no such thing as cultural appropriation. But I don't, and if I'm wrong, I will apologise. Not like, sackcloth and ashes type stuff, but I will apologise. The latest example is Marks and Spencer's launching what they call a Spanish paella croquette. It's a croquette, which is like a little potato sausage, usually covered in breadcrumbs, not unlike a Scotch egg, actually. They're just the breadcrumb element of it. And they would put some in it. They would put some paella. Well, they put a bit of rice, I imagine. So it's a mixture of potato, rice, and chorizo, which is a spicy sausage. A croquette is normally French, but you can get them in Spain with serrano ham. So it's normally potato and cured meat, potato and ham. Not gammon, that's not cured, that's boiled. It's a very important distinction to make. You wouldn't want a gammon croquette. Well, first of all, you wouldn't find a gammon fan wanting to eat that fancy foreign muck. But equally, there are technicalities here that don't apply as well. The British ambassador has led a backlash against the product, describing it as wrong on every level. So, why is what I want to know at 8 minutes after 11. I genuinely want to know. Actually, yeah, I'm going to go all in. If I get this wrong and I offend you, then I will apologise politely. But is there really any such thing as cultural appropriation? I do. But this is what I mean about my woke credentials, because this is Daily Mail columnist territory. There were complaints at a Mexican... Well, it was reported that there were complaints about students at a Mexican restaurant in Southampton, I think it was, wearing sombreros. And there were huge complaints when Jamie Oliver put his name to a jerk chicken seasoning mix, or even a jerk chicken dish like a ready meal. People were very, very cross about that because it bore no relationship whatsoever to the traditional Caribbean cuisine of jerk chicken. And I understand some of the sensitivities involved in this, but I don't understand most of them. I don't feel it. So help me out. I mean, cultural appropriation is like nicking a frieze from the Parthenon in the middle of Athens, bringing it back, sticking it in the British Museum and naming it after the bloke that nicked them. That's cultural appropriation. Launching a croquette and describing it as a paella croquette, I just don't see that as cultural. I want you to tell me where the offence lies, where the genuine offence lies. Are you offended by the... All right, and I'll start saying chorizo. I'm sorry. Yeah, but I'm not... I'm English, aren't I? So again, what do you say? You say Don Quixote. I say Don Quixote. Because I don't say Barcelona. I say, where are you going for your holidays? I'm just popping to Barcelona for a long weekend. What's the capital of France? Paris or Paris? This is one of those conversations that I don't think we've ever got around to having on the radio. But my old English teacher, who was one of the cleverest people I've ever met, my old English teacher was adamant that you anglicise every single pronunciation or none of them. And if you're going to anglicise Don Quixote, then you should by rights be saying Madrid, and chorizo. But I'm not. I'm English, so I pronounce it like I read it. I'm going to Paris, I'm going to Barcelona, and I'm going to eat some chorizo. So I apologise to anonymous texter number 743 today that I am mispronouncing what you describe as chorizo. But I'm sorry. And yes, I did just say the British ambassador. Well spotted. I thought that might have gone over your head. That'd be a job for Nigel Farage, wouldn't it? He could have been the British ambassador to Washington under Donald Trump. He'd have loved that. Would have been perfect for him. So, look, there's a technical problem here in that paella in Valencia is a really specific dish. It only has, I think, rabbit, chicken, artichokes, snails and runner beans in it. Outside Valencia, anything that's got rice in it is essentially called a paella. Inside Valencia, everything else that's not a paella is called arroz, which is the Spanish word for rice, or arroz, as I would have to call it if I was sticking to the principle that I laid out just a moment ago. So you can have a question of nomenclature. You can't call it that because it doesn't bear any resemblance to this. But if you mixed up a paella, a croquetas, and a lump of chorizo, that is what it would be. It would be a Spanish paella croquette. And the phrase cultural appropriation is fascinating to me because usually when I think there is a chink in the armour of my woke credentials, it turns out that I'm in the wrong. It turns out that I am actually missing something. And you know that the days are among the days I enjoy most would be the days when you actually make me realise that I've got something wrong. I wrote a whole book about it a couple of years ago. You actually make me realise that I've got something wrong. And that would be on this occasion, it would be the neat explanation of why it actually does matter for an English food company, whether it's Marks and Spencer's or my good friend Jamie, coming in and appropriating an ethnic cuisine from elsewhere. And I can't for the life of me think of a British example, except perhaps the chorizo, Scotch egg. But does that offend Scotch egg producers? Because in my experience, the Scotch egg producers have jumped on all sorts of things. I mean, you can get, I forget the name of the company, but they sell them at a deli around my way, and you can get 5 or 6 or 7 different types of Scotch egg, all of which have a kind of international flavour to them, whether it's chorizo or there might be one that's a bit sort of tikka-ish or something, or a curried one. I mean, is that right? I mean, I can't imagine, I don't think I'm being silly, I can't imagine a Scotch egg enthusiast getting cross about a Spanish chef using chorizo instead of chorizo, tomato, using chorizo instead of sausage meat. Can you? Or possibly you can. And that might be proof that I'm missing something here. So I'm sitting here saying there's no such thing as cultural appropriation because if a Spanish chef used chorizo in a Scotch egg rather than sausage meat, I'd be perfectly comfortable about it. I'm missing something fairly crucial. But what is it? And is this British exceptionalism? Is this, I tell you what, you weren't expecting this. Does this tie in with Rishi Sunak's decision to cancel the meeting with the Greeks? So because we have such a legacy of arrogance, a post-imperial legacy of arrogance, we see the world as something that until relatively recently we had subjugated and controlled. Therefore, we can't quite conceive of the idea, of having our cuisine. It might also have something to do with the fact we don't really have a British cuisine. But we can't quite conceive of the fact of feeling pride in the Spanishness or the Frenchness or the Caribbeanness of a given dish. And therefore, if a foreign chef were to come along and jazz it up with additions that were relevant to their country of origin, we'd just be like, oh, you carry on, that's absolutely fine. Why would we get our knickers in a twist about that? Is there some British exceptionalism going on here? Because that is a difficult corner to defend, because that sounds even more arrogant than usual from the British point of view. You're sort of patting a Spanish fella on the head and saying, okay, mate, look, I know, I completely understand why you feel so protective about your croquetas, but, we're not going to get bogged down in the cultural appropriation of a Scotch egg. But you do have the DOPs, or you do if you're a member of the European Union, you have the protections in place. But that's more about regional specifics. So you can't make a blue cheese in Birmingham and call it Stilton. You have to have I think we've axed all that now. I think we've opted out of that as a concept. We've abolished our right to protect marks on things as European Union levers. But that notion, I can't find it. I can't see it. This idea that cultural appropriation is a very big deal. Tell me why I'm wrong. Or, of course, why I'm right. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. And don't turn it into a Richard Littlejohn column. It's not like, oh, well, I had a chicken chow mein last night. Do I have to write a letter of apology to the Chinese ambassador? It's a genuine question about whether the offence that I have read about is real and or justified. That's all, okay? 0345 60 60 973. Apparently you can say chorizo or chorizo, but never chorizo, like what you just said. said James. Well, again, I go back to Don Quixote, or Don Quixote, as he should be called by rights. But I think we've got enough to get our teeth into. You see what I did there? The British ambassador. We've got enough to get our teeth into without necessarily exploring my theory on the pronunciation of all and every foreign name. It is 11:16. 19 minutes after 11, Natasha Devon, my friend and colleague, has appointed herself as one of my many Wazak alarms today, and correctly so, as I misrepresented slightly the jerk, well, I called it jerk chicken, but what Jamie did was introduce a dish called jerk rice, and Natasha explains you can't jerk rice. Jerk isn't the seasoning, but it's the way of cooking, and it was born out of struggle. You cover something to stop the steam rising up in order to avoid being detected by racists who wish you harm. So, it's intrinsic to West Indian history, and people were upset because clearly no research had been done on that one. So I don't know that you would actually call that cultural appropriation as opposed to cultural ignorance. And you may have a view on whether or not that reaction was justified, but it's not your word. So it's not your decision to decide how offensive the misappropriation of the word is. That's interesting. This is different. This is about, well, you know what it's about. I spent 20 minutes explaining. Kel's in Harrow. Kel, what would you like to say?
James, just very quickly, I've been listening to you for almost like 15 years,
Wow.
Our daughter's around the same age. I've actually watched your daughters grow from the outside, obviously.
Of course.
And you've watched mine.
Yes.
Know what I mean? So I want to just first say that. And you were very soon.
There's a huge buck. You've established all this fellow feeling and bonhomie, and you're about to spank me, aren't you? Here it comes. Here it comes.
Very soothing broadcaster all my life. Trust me. I've got to literally half my life. Well, not maybe quarter of it. But anyway, let me just first say this. It does exist.
Yes.
Yeah, and you did give some examples, okay? And I spoke to a researcher just now, and I said to her that a few examples also would be hair, for instance. So if it's braided or cornrow hair. So it was popular, obviously, amongst Caribbeans, right, but not to the outside world until a few maybe actors or actresses started wearing it, or singers, and then all of a sudden it's now fashionable.
Yes.
Okay, and same with, like, let's say Jennifer Lopez, rounded curves, I don't have to say anything else. And then it's like, let's say for instance, for the African Caribbeans, a lot of them were strapping themselves down because it just wasn't the in thing to be rounded and curvy. And all of a sudden she now starts, doing her thing. And then all of a sudden it's now fashionable, to actually have rounded curves, and all sorts that females will have. It does exist. It is what it is. Yeah. The only thing is that who's going to finance it? Who's going to back it up? So if it's the food, jerk chicken or pepper pot, my parents are from the Caribbean as well. So it's like, if it's a thing of where we can't finance it to actually promote or advertise it, then no one's going to know about it. But as soon as somebody, that has finances to back it up, the powers that be, or the British society, or citizens, whatever, or the British Empire, and then if they can back it up, then, it's going to be a fashionable thing. And
I'm understanding most of what you're saying. What's the difference then? I mean, is it about the status of the partners in the process? So Jennifer Lopez is the senior partner in the process that you describe, and West Indian women are the junior partner. So she does something and gets a completely different reception for. But why is that not good for everybody? In that it brings something that might previously have been unappreciated into the mainstream.
Well, well, that's just the thing. It is good for everybody.
Right.
Somebody decides when it's going to be good for everybody. That's just the thing.
And that's a problem for you?
Yes, that is a problem, yeah. Because some people...
But is it such a big problem that you'd rather it didn't happen at all and we carried on confining certain behaviours and certain cuisines to certain parts of the population?
It'd be great if somebody stole your goods and told you, by the way, we've stolen them. Yeah, like make it known we've stolen your goods. So be it if it's from India or parts of Africa where they've had their jewels or have certain archives or whatever stolen, and it's like they've made it their own when it's not.
Yeah, I can see that differently though, because we're talking really about concepts and behaviours rather than about jewels and chests of treasure. How can it be? Listen, I think you're almost certainly right, and I think my privilege is out of control today, but it's authentic, the position I'm I'm describing. I nearly said adopting. I'm not adopting a position. Right. I don't feel it. I don't. So someone says, look, I'll give you an example. So as a text here, is this guy for real? Did he really just say that having a curvy figure is cultural? And it is. I mean, I know that it is. I know exactly the point that you were making, and I know exactly that. Oh man, alive! We've done it now. I've got to choose my words so carefully. But particularly prominent body parts do have a cultural origin. Body shapes are much more prevalent in certain parts of the population than in others. And then when a Hispanic woman adopts similar emphases, it does appear to be a form of theft. I understand that, but what's the alternative?
Okay.
Also, she's Puerto Rican, I think, Jennifer Lopez, so she should be allowed to have Caribbean attributes, Junior points out.
Well, Hispanic, I mean, there are mixtures. She's a mix, both of an African as well as European. I mean, we don't have to go too.
So what's the alternative? What's the ideal world then, and for you on this?
No, it's not. It's not about the ideal world. Just
acknowledging that it exists. I can do.
Thank you.
No,
yes.
I do that. I do that. But is it a problem?
It's not okay. It's only you recognise it, and you point it out, but unfortunately, many don't.
So that's where our texter comes in,
right? And James, this is why I've been listening to you for so many years.
Yeah.
I don't often call you lot because oftentimes I agree with you.
No,
it's Nick Ferrari I call, and I'm the one that totally cusses him off.
Okay,
so you and I call. Okay.
I mean, thank you for not cussing me off, but you're right. You've helped me see the distinction between. I mean, it's even lazy to be saying how offensive is it. You need to understand exactly what it is, and that doesn't mean that you are then describing it as offensive or whatever it may be. It's the denial of the acknowledgement. It's the denial of the source, if you like, as opposed to the source of denial. Hey! Oh, I'm on fire today. It's the denial of the source that is problematic, and that does feel like, and that is the appropriation. But I don't know how you can do that. You can't. If I were to get my hair cornrowed, which I grant you is unlikely on the grounds of physics and absence of hair, but how would I then acknowledge the source of the style that I had adopted, or would people rather that I didn't? I don't know. Harj asks, what's the difference between embracing a different culture and cultural appropriation? And I think that Kel's answered that, Harj, or at least most of it, by pointing out the differences. Acknowledgement, but then I throw in the extra problem of how do you articulate acknowledgement? Well, I do like these conversations, but I'm not sure that we're going to get a completely binary, clear answer to any of them at the moment. Kel has helped. Will Neil at Winchester Services. I like the specific nature of your locale. What would you like to say, Neil?
Hiya, James.
Hello,
nice
mate.
to talk to you.
Likewise.
So, I was out in Spain for about 5 years. I was working as a chef.
Lovely.
And I think the reason that Marks and Spencer's have offended people is because chorizo does not belong in any sort of paella. So you have different regions have different paellas, but none of them have chorizo. And the other thing that they have done is a croqueta in Spain is made with a thickened bechamel sauce.
It's bechamel, not potato. I got that wrong. I take that back. This is a creamy bechamel sauce. It's not got potatoes. I'm thinking of croquettes, aren't I, rather than croquetas.
Yes, I didn't have time to actually look what the ingredients
No, that's my job. It's not your job, it's my job. I got that wrong. So here it is. This is what it is. It's got paella rice, smoky chorizo, saffron, and a creamy bechamel sauce.
Okay, yes. I think probably then it is just a chorizo. So the Spanish are fiercely proud of their cuisine. If you want to offend a Spaniard, tell them that their cuisine's not very good. My girlfriend is Spanish, and if I say this, there will be an argument.
But no one's saying it's not very good. They're just messing with it a bit in a way that I don't think British chefs would get offended by.
No, well, what you said earlier when I was listening about the fact that we don't really have a history, our cuisine is not at the same level. That, I think, is why the English don't get offended, because we're so multicultural. We've got more Indian and Chinese restaurants than we do English.
It could also be, well, it's our national dish is chicken tikka masala. This has gone in an unexpected direction, Neil. Appropriately enough, given that you're at the Winchester Services as we speak.
Yes. Yeah. Not going to go and eat at McDonald's.
It could be because we've never been invaded, or at least not since 1066. So what you could call the indigenous cuisine has never felt in need of protection from invaders or outsiders, whereas pretty much all of continental Europe, as we were discussing in the first hour in the context of the Elgin Marbles, has been under the rule of conquistadors at some point, conquerors at some point, and therefore the food assumes a much deeper cultural status than most Brits can understand. I bet Scots can understand it a bit, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's it. I think there's something there. It's a great point. And so a Spanish chef would be outraged by the idea of having a croquetas with chorizo in it and calling it paella.
Yes, yeah. I mean, calling it paella is a problem, sir. You also spoke earlier about different arroz dishes.
I did.
Oh, there's a dish called arroz al horno, and I like making it, but with a few adjustments. And if you do that, then you will get criticised. So instead of calling it arroz al horno, I call it arroz al meal. And then I get away with it.
Yes, so you give it your own name, and so that that is. I don't think that is a British phenomenon, and I bet we've stumbled on something there with the notion of invasion and protecting culture from invaders. Do you know one of the things that I absolutely love, and I've only ever eaten it in two places. I've eaten it in the Canary Islands, and I've eaten it at a lovely place. They've moved on now. Ben Handley, one of my favourite chefs of all time, had a little place in Norfolk. And cod cheeks. That's quite a big deal in Spanish cuisine, I think.
Yes, well, that's actually quite a big deal worldwide. You know, it's
just
such
not
a
here.
tender, beautiful piece of meat. Just not in England. Well, even in England, if you find the right chef, I'm sure they will know its quality, and it's
one of the most delicious pieces of fish I've ever had in my life. Neil, thank you very much. 11:31 is the time. What is it then? We go getting a fairly clearer idea, but it all went a bit clever then. Is it because we've never really been invaded that we don't understand the relationship that a people can have, a cultural relationship that a people can have with their, what we might loosely describe as indigenous foods or their cultural cuisine? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. I mean, you'd thought, I knew this was going to be a slightly tricky subject, because if I say I don't understand why other people are offended, I run the risk of sounding like a Daily Mail columnist or the kind of phone-in host who's constantly insisting that everybody else is too thin-skinned while demonstrating epic thinness of skin themselves. But I didn't see this one coming. I should have done as well, especially with my surname. Never been invaded, James. Tell that to the Dutch. A Dutch fleet and army led by William of Orange turned up in the UK, kicked out the king with the help of some collaborators, and then ruled over the United Kingdom. British exceptionalism means that this is not classified as an invasion. Not quite, actually. No hostages, I would say. I think probably the scale of the collaboration that you describe and the rather Byzantine, well, not even Byzantine, the rather nebulous nature of monarch appointment in this country. One of the great myths of the British royal family is that there is some sort of divine thread running from, I don't know, Egfrith or Ethelred right through to the current king. The horse trading that went on, everybody knows the story of Lady Jane Grey, but the horse trading that went on, particularly in the period that you describe, was spectacular. So it wasn't quite the case that William of Orange was a de facto invader. It's more that he was the invited guest of the ruling class. So it's not an invasion. And I don't think that we all started protecting Lancashire hot pots because we were worried that William of Orange was going to sort of outlaw them as part of his cultural imperialism. But I could be wrong. V is in Taunton. What's going on, V?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, I hope
did you hear my tummy then? Did you hear my tummy?
Historical matters that you're already addressing.
My tummy just made the most remarkable noises. It's because I'm talking about food so much. I'm working up an appetite. But I digress, V. What would you like to say? I won't quiz you on history.
Thank you. I think food is a really difficult one to culturally appropriate. And I know that it's a big issue around the world, and certainly where I'm from in Australia, it's a massive issue because there are fancy restaurants taking sort of native Australian ingredients and products and using it in fancy food, and it's never actually reflected into the culture that it comes from. So it's appropriated because the elements are taken, and then there's no credit given, as your previous caller was talking about, making sure that we know the culture that it's come from and it's reflected in some way. But I think food is an art form, and I think food takes inspiration and ideas from all over the world. And the only time in my experience when it has been offensive, and I do speak from a position of privilege, so I will highlight that now and make that really obvious, but when I was in Paris with my mum, I ordered some teriyaki chicken, and it was served with penne. And that, to me, was really offensive.
That sounds rank. That sounds absolutely right. Who would look at teriyaki chicken and think, I know what this needs, a little bit of penne pasta?
Who should be offended there, the Japanese or the Italians, or maybe both?
Do you know, I think
it was awful.
You've led me to a revelation, V, or a revelation. It depends what they called it. I think the problem here is that they've stuck paella in the title, where it bears no resemblance whatsoever to paella. So it depends what they called your teriyaki chicken with penne pasta. If they just called it teriyaki chicken with penne pasta, you kind of haven't got a complaint. I mean, it's an abomination. It's a cultural abomination. It's not a cultural appropriation, is it?
You're exactly right, and I think you've highlighted the issue of what people are talking about is the use of language around it, and that's when it starts to get really fiddly. So we're talking about Jamie Oliver's jerk-inspired chicken.
No, it wasn't, though. I mean, Natasha has got me back. I mean, next time I see Jamie, I don't imagine I'll take him to task on this because we've got more interesting things to talk about. But he clearly, you can't call it rice, jerk rice, when it's a method of cooking. I think that somebody somewhere got the mistake I made earlier of thinking that the spices rather than the method of cooking was where the word jerk came from. So that's just an error rather than a theft or an appropriation. It's just a cultural misstep. And I don't know, though, finally, V, you're clearly a well-travelled woman. The notion of invasion is very attractive to me. The fact that we don't in this country feel protective of our cuisine in the way that other countries do is perhaps because we've never had to protect them from invaders.
Well, the point at which the cultural appropriation becomes
suppression,
hard to swallow, is when it comes from a more powerful source, stealing it from a less powerful.
We'll come in, we'll help ourselves to that, and we'll name it after ourselves. We will rob you of its provenance, which is where Kel started.
That's exactly right, and I think that's
I've got to crack on. The phone line's gone funny. It's a huge delay on your line. I don't know why, but it's driving me potty. But you got your points across brilliantly. So that's where Kel started things off this hour. It's the theft of provenance that is the problem. Did you hear that? That's my tummy again. Did you hear that then? This is what happens when we talk about food. It's the strangest thing. John's in Newton-le-Willows. He said, I heard your tummy rumble, and I'm only listening on an Alexa device. Imagine if you had headphones on. You'd think you were in the middle of an avalanche. Sinead is in Colchester. Sinead, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I want to speak specifically about the appropriation of hairstyles.
Okay.
So I'm black, and I grew up in London. And when I think this cultural appropriation of hairstyles is a relatively new conversation.
Yes, it is.
So I'm 21 years old. But when I was about 6, 7, 8, my white friends and we all used to wear cane rows, and no one thought anything about it. Like, in fact, I remember one of my white friends saying, David Beckham's got cane rows, so I've got cane rows. And it wasn't a big deal. No one was offended. In fact, sometimes some parents would do it for any of us at a sleepover. So
that's nice.
What I think people should do is divert their attention towards hair politics in general. So obviously a lot of people are discriminated because of their hairstyles, for example, dreadlocks or braids. I think we should combat that issue rather than being offended by someone who doesn't know the history of a hairstyle they're wearing. Whilst it's ignorant, I'm going to divert my attention towards something that I think needs addressing worldwide rather than this ignorant person.
And that's ignorance. That's ignorance in the generous sense of the word. That's ignorance as in absent of knowledge, rather than ignorant as in deliberately offensive or deliberately obnoxious. Can you separate the two? I wonder, though, Sinead, because I think that the what was the phrase you used as a to distinguish from the cultural appropriation of hairstyles? Hair politics.
Yeah, hair politics.
I mean, to understand a protective feeling towards cornrows, for example, you need to have a better understanding of black hair, for want of a better phrase. You know, the idea that the reason why a black lad shouldn't have to obey the same hairstyle rules as a white lad is because their hair is so physically different, and so the politics is linked in a way to the styles.
So I think they are very closely related. However, for example, if Sarah in my class gets braids, that means nothing to me rather than if I'm going to apply for a job. So I study journalism. Yeah. So that's a career where you need to be very professional, presentable all times. I could go somewhere and be told, my hair isn't appropriate and the braids or something. That's more serious.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That issue within that company rather than someone in my class.
It's a really good point. Yeah, it is. And ignorance just means I've got it because David Beckham got it. I didn't realise that there's a long history with complications in it and lessons in it. But that doesn't make me a bad person for having my hair done like David Beckham. Okay, here's a question for you, Sinead. Ready?
Sure.
All right, you ready? What about the cultural appropriation of Irish names?
Well, I'm actually an 8th Irish.
I just saw it coming a mile off, coming over the horizon. There it is.
Irish, so to honour her Irish heritage, she called me Sinead.
I love it. No, quite right, Sue. It's a wonderful name. And unfortunately, it's one of those Irish names that I presume you spend half of your life having to spell for people.
I do, and then every time someone's like, "No, that's an Irish name," and I'm like, "Yeah, my nan's half Irish."
Well, there's a lesson there.
I do know.
That's exactly right. So, and also, I mean, get me jumping to conclusions just because you describe yourself as a black woman. I presume that your name has somehow been appropriated from Ireland rather than from your own Irish heritage. So, pause for thought for everybody. It's coming up to 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien. She's right, isn't she? And that's my position, explained from a much more sympathetic perspective. It's like, all right, you can tell me that this is really important, but you can't think it's more important than this. Addressing some ludicrous policies that presume that everybody has Caucasian hair is much more important than getting cross or protective about somebody with Caucasian hair adopting a style that only really exists because of the difficulty of maintaining non-Caucasian hair in various climates. It's 11:45. Whether it should or not, I do not know, but I do think that this Greek story, this Elgin Marble story, may assume a little bit more momentum, actually. Sometimes when we get to 11 o'clock, I think, well, that's done. But the backbenchers who are going nuts about emigres and refugees are, I mean, for once, they've got a pertinent point to make, is that refusing an opportunity to discuss policy with the leader of a government at the very heart of Europe's refugee crisis, it looks like a very stupid thing to do if you really are prioritising émigré management. We shall... I come back and change my mind on that, but it is a little bit ridiculous. 10 minutes to 12 is the time. Cultural appropriation. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I don't think we've pinned down precisely what the problem is, but we're close. So although most of us, and I think Sinead put this best, although most of us recognise the reality of the irritation of something with a strong and long cultural history being adopted by people utterly unaware of it, there are bigger fish to fry. But the denial or the ignorance of provenance is hurtful the more protective you feel towards the thing that has the provenance. And at that point, I throw in my contribution, which is I wonder whether it has something to do with the history of invasion. So dishes that were... I don't like the word indigenous because in the context of humanity it's meaningless. But in the context of food, oddly, it isn't, because a foodstuff, a dish that has grown up in a specific locale and is therefore considered to be part of the fabric of that locale. And then an invader comes in, and invaders often want to wipe out. Some invaders want to wipe out the civilization or the culture that existed before. Some, like the Romans, want to co-opt it. And therefore you have a very protective attitude towards your what you might call your national or your regional dishes. Paella being a wonderful example, because even within Spain, battle rages over what it is and what it isn't. And the argument between someone in Valencia and someone elsewhere in Spain would be one of protectionism or protectiveness, I think. But what is it? There isn't a British one. I don't think that there is a British one. And you can send me a list of things that you think are British food. Scott's done that. Fish and chips. That was Jewish emigres in the East End of London, I think, in the late 19th century, although no one's gone definitive. Full English breakfast. Well, I go to Scotland, order a full Scottish, see what you get brought. It's actually nicer because you get potato scones and white pudding. Arbroath Smokies. Smoked fish, mate. You can't really claim dominance of that. Pie and mash. That might work, actually. Pie and mash. Pies you can't claim because pies exist all over the world. Pitika, to get Greek about it. Mashed potatoes, well, you get them in a croquette in France, don't you? But not in Spain? Well, you certainly get it in And so we are quite defensive about our food. Go online and Google full English in America, says Scott, who's from Scotland but in London. But it's funny. It's funny protectionism. It's not like, oh, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. Do you know what? I've disproved my own theory. In the really mad days of Brexit, and I think the Daily Telegraph actually reported that David Frost's negotiating position would have been enhanced by the fact that he had a full English breakfast that morning. A full English breakfast that morning. Oh, no, I've done it again. So I was waiting in Five Guys for my daughter to come back from the toilet. We'd been to the theatre together, and I just thought, this is just ridiculous. I'll do a bit of gammon baiting. So I just Googled the 5 or 6 main ingredients of a full English breakfast and pointed out that I think sausages originated in Sumeria in 2,000 years ago or something like that, and the first people to cure pork were I don't know, I can't remember. So I just put this little thing together about there being no such thing as a full English breakfast. And everyone went nuts. Do you know who even got involved on Twitter? Oh, this is quite sad because I was speaking warmly. I couldn't remember why I'd changed my mind about him in the first place. The current Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, took issue with me on Twitter for pointing out that all of the constituent parts of a full English breakfast could quite easily be described as having their origin somewhere else. But by then, the Brexit supporters were so broken and so thin-skinned and so shamed by their own idiocy that they would literally have gone to war. And I mean literally have gone to war over the definition of a full English breakfast. So we do it. We can do it. Except it was almost the opposite of cultural appropriation, pointing out there's not really any such thing as a full English breakfast. Absolutely boiled the proverbial of the weirdos and half-wits that had still clung to the carcass of Brexit, even as they sent David Frost into battle for us. And we all know how well that turned out. Chrissy's in Glasgow. Chrissy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. This could be a very positive debate, but I fear it's a bit like nailing jelly to a wall.
Yes, that's all right. Or Jell-O, of course, if you're American.
It's very much about, in my opinion, it's very much about perspective. It's not fact.
Yeah.
So there's connotations to the words appropriation, because you think about taking and stealing,
yes,
rather than borrowing. Now, I personally believe it's an inevitable thing with a smaller world because we travel so much.
Of course, yes.
So it's the kind of thing that we're going to see much more of, and it opens. Sinead was wonderful. I loved listening to Sinead, and a point that she made really stuck home and made me think, yes, this opens conversations and educates. It's a way that I can learn about things. Now, I'm a fiercely Scottish and proud lassie, and I'm fiercely defensive of my heritage and culture and the provenance of the food and other things that are up here. However, I'm more than happy to share it. I don't want to keep it for mine in an aggressive manner. We have an Indian chef up here that came up with haggis pakora, and it is delicious.
I've had that, actually.
It's wonderful, but is he appropriating Scottish culture or is Scottish culture appropriating Indian culture?
Both.
At what point do you... Exactly.
I think the chicken tikka masala was invented in Glasgow as well, actually.
Well, I think, yeah, it's Britain certainly, but I don't know exactly where. But we're sharing cultures. It depends on your perspective, and if you're going to take an offensive posture, I think that's quite subjective, and the only reason that's been given such a prominence today is because of who the person is. If Joe Blogs in the street had said, well, it's not paella, it's blah, 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 nobody would really pay much attention. But if somebody with a profile says something, everyone's making a big deal out of it.
That's not quite. I think we'd part company slightly there. There is a level of protectiveness towards paella in Spain that I don't think a British person feels towards any British cuisine. I really don't, except those weirdos who had a fit of the vapours when I pointed out the origins of a British breakfast, a full English breakfast. I don't think there's anybody who feels that it's really important that you technically define exactly what should and shouldn't be in a Sunday roast, for example, or in
that's true. I mean, for example, when you spoke about... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, James.
Sorry, I do it all the time.
That's true. Nailing jelly to a wall, that's what I said. For example, I could get really pernickety about you because you mentioned in passing about Arbroath Smokies, and, well, it's like smoked fish, mate. Yeah. You are wrong.
I know.
So, an Arbroath Smoky cannot be termed an Arbroath Smoky unless it is caught and landed within a 15-mile radius of Arbroath.
Well,
so you can't. So there you go.
Well, no, actually, I'm going to fight you. I'm going to fight you on this. I bet it can now, because the only DOP, the only whatever DOP stands for, something of origin, designation origin of produce or something like that. The only one I'm aware of that we've been subjected to in my lifetime was presided over by the European Union. So by leaving the European Union, I think that if I wanted to smoke some fish in my garden tonight, I could call them Brentford Smokies. Or Arbroath. No, I think I could call them Arbroath Smokies now, because who's going to enforce that rule now that we're not in the European Union?
Well, yeah.
No, it's not. I think it's another example of Brexit being a bloody stupid thing to do. So Here you go. In 2004, the European Commission registered the designation Arbroath Smokies as a protected geographical indication under the EU's Protected Food Name Scheme, acknowledging its unique status. So who protects it now?
Arbroath people?
What's the name?
I don't know.
Penny Mordaunt. Penny Mordaunt will stand and fight for Arbroath Smokies. She will fight and stand for smoked Arbroath fish from within a 50. I will stand and I will fight, because that is what concerns. I don't know who's going to defend it now, but she's at a loose end.
I don't know, but I see it as an opportunity to celebrate the pride that I've got in Scottish culture, an expansion of that Scottish culture.
That.
I don't think for a minute somebody's going to steal haggis. But the point you made.
No,
about
but what if someone in Spain, not the haggis pecora, but what if someone in Spain stuck a load of chorizo in it and called it a spaghis?
That sounds interesting. I'd like to try that.
No, that hasn't worked either. So we haven't quite pinned down. Can we squeeze Dan in, or I'm too late for that? I might come to Dan after the news, because he is, according to my notes, he is a paella chef, which is not quite Ray Liotta territory, but it does put him in a position of a particular set of skills that may be of use to the rest of us. Also in the next hour, we're going to catch up with what's been going on at the COVID inquiry, and we're going to return to a truly tragic tale of our times, featuring the Conservative candidate for London Mayor, Susan Hall, who was on with Nick this morning, describing her experiences of being a victim of crime in ways which I think might make your hair stand on end. Her intention to come on the show was to prove how terrible London had become under Sadiq Khan, and the crime she has endured, in her mind, proves it conclusively. It is 4 minutes after 12. We're just going to catch up with Dan in Southfields on the paella issue and the cultural appropriation issue, and then we're going to go to a very dark place and discover the grisly details of the appalling crime that the Conservative candidate for London Mayor suffered on the London Underground, which she believes passionately is proof of just how awful London has become under the mayoralty of Sadiq Khan. But I mean, there are trigger warnings galore on this. It's if you think Crime Watch was grisly, this story, which she related, and fair play to her for finding the courage to tell the story. She related it to Nick Ferrari earlier on LBC, and I tell you now, there was not a dry eye in the house. So that is up next, and I will think of a question to ask you off the back of that, if I can, reassemble myself emotionally after revisiting the trauma that we're about to witness. But first, back to the paella question. Last word goes to Dan, who is in Southfields. What's it going to be, Dan?
Hi, James. Thanks for getting me on. Really appreciate it. I did forget to mention as well, actually, something probably quite relevant to the conversation. I represented the UK this year in the International Concourse in Valencia, which is a competition I have every year for 45 of the best, but I use that term loosely, paella chefs in the world.
You represented the UK at the international paella competition.
Yeah, in Valencia.
Right, here you go. You get one of these.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
Wow, James.
they will come.
There you go, mate. Did you win?
Wow.
Did you win?
No, I didn't.
Well, it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter now because you got a Ray Liotta.
Exactly.
What do you want to say?
35 of them are Spanish paella chefs, so it's quite a hard competition.
Wow.
So yeah, really hard. 15 internationals and 30. There were 45 in all. 30 Spanish from all over Spain and Valencia. Yeah. So I know a little bit about paella, and I've cooked a lot of paellas in my life. And I teach people how to cook paella as well, authentic paella. And so yeah, your other commentators, people that said that there's never chorizo in paella in Spain, and particularly in Valencia, that would be a mortal sin. But yeah, from the point of view of croquetas, what's so odd for I think someone from Spain is that a croqueta is, as you say, it's something with bechamel, always with bechamel in Spain, and it's always either sort of ham or it's what they call cocina de aprovecho, so it's kind of, it uses up bits of leftovers, yeah? But what's so odd is to put a paella or any reference of paella in croquetas, because they're perfectly brilliant as they are, all in many different flavours. And if you're introducing something for the first time or introducing a culture, why go for the most odd, unusual combination? It's like if you're introducing pizzas into England and your first opportunity to introduce that, you do a Hawaiian. It's like, it seems like such an odd, you're immediately going to offend, the people from that country.
Yes.
And this is not a small. If this is people, when people come and they do it in their home and they do it their own way, like I get it, all right. And I say to people, as long as it tastes good,
but you're the perfect contributor to this conversation because you've reminded us that the paella. You've even got me pronouncing it correctly. The paella is.
Paella, yeah.
It's decades, if not centuries, of fine-tuning to the point where it merits an international competition. So some geezer turns up and starts lobbing all sorts into it. I can see why that would actually be offensive.
62 years this competition's been going for.
Is it really?
Yeah.
How did you get into it?
Well, it's a long story, James, and we haven't got time, but I run a pop-up in London, which I started in the pandemic. Basically, it was in the events industry, that all shut down. So I set up a business and just cook it. I just really wanted people to see how good real paella was. And it just exploded, just got really popular.
What's the company called? You're still in business, are you? Still doing it?
I am. Well, so we've paused it. So it's called Paella in the Pod.
Yep.
But I've paused it. We're actually I've been launching bigger events, Valencia Nights, which is trying to cater for more because it was just so oversubscribed. You have to come, James. I've been meaning to invite you for a long time.
I'd love to.
I'd reopen it just for you.
No, don't be daft. I'll wait until the next big one's on, and I definitely won't ask for any chorizo in my paella because
you won't get any.
You call security over, and it is. So what you've communicated is the combination of passion and expertise that is brought to some dishes, and therefore appropriation or even a dilution or pollution of those dishes does feel like a form of cultural affront, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And just one last little thing, James.
Absolutely.
Without the Moors and without the Romans, paella wouldn't exist either, because rice was introduced into Spain in the 6th, 7th century. In a region just to the south of Valencia, and then and cultivated by them. So
it's a multicultural dish, a true melting pot. Right. Well, do you know? I've just found that tweet I was talking about a minute ago because I thought I might have imagined it, and it was patriotic. The Telegraph called it a patriotic breakfast of sausages, baked beans, bacon, and eggs. A patriotic breakfast before leading a team of 100 UK officials into negotiations. So I pointed out sausages were invented by Sumerians about 300 BC. All beans used in baked beans are native to South America. Pork was first salted in ancient China, and hens were first domesticated in ancient Egypt. And it's the same, isn't it? It's still a British breakfast. It's still a Spanish paella, but it's actually evidence of the tide, the ebb and flow of humanity over continents over time.
And if you don't think the English are protective over dishes, try putting sliced potatoes on a shepherd's pie, and people would say, "What's that?"
They would, but they wouldn't kick off. You probably wouldn't get the British ambassador complaining to the relevant authorities. Dan, thank you, and good luck with that. What a fascinating story! I love that. I thought I might have imagined it or exaggerated it, but this man is now Home Secretary, not Foreign Secretary. I got that wrong a minute ago. So that's all I tweeted. The Telegraph put. This is perfect, isn't it? This is literally, oddly, A, an example to revisit my greatest hits on Twitter, and B, quite a good example of people feeling very protective about British food, which I didn't think was a thing, but I forgot how thin-skinned and pathetic we'd become by the time David Frost was supposedly negotiating an oven-ready Brexit. So the Telegraph wrote this: David Frost enjoyed a delicious patriotic breakfast of sausages, baked beans, bacon and eggs before leading a team of 100 UK officials into negotiations. By March of 2020, that was news. So desperate were the Brexit-supporting client media and politicians like James Cleverly, so desperate were they to portray anything as either patriotic or impressive, that they started talking about David Frost's breakfast as a national news story. That period of British history, historians are going to pore over it, wondering what the hell we were all on. That is a story from the Daily Telegraph on March the 2nd, 2020. David Frost enjoyed a delicious patriotic breakfast. A patriotic breakfast. And patriotism is a state of mind. And with the possible exception of Jacob Rees-Mogg, sausages don't have minds. A patriotic breakfast of sausages, baked beans, bacon and eggs before leading a team of 100 UK officials, like a sort of Roman army, like a centurion, collection of centurions, into negotiations. I'm waiting in the atrium of Five Guys in Piccadilly Circus, waiting for one of my girls to come back from the loo. And I thought I'll give myself time. I'll Google sausages, beans, bacon and eggs, and just see how patriotic or how much we could realistically claim that they are either British or capable of harbouring genuine emotions towards their country of residence or origins. And I came up with the sausages were invented by the Sumerians in 3000 BC. All beans in baked beans are native to South America. Pork was first salted in ancient China, and hens were first domesticated in ancient Egypt. Patriotic. And I wrote, what an awful joke Brexit is making of the UK. And the man who is now actually Home Secretary and previously Foreign Secretary replied, quote tweeted, my mum came to the UK in 1966 and Dad's family in 1066. This is what a grown man wrote. By your definition, I'm not British because my ancestry wasn't here since the dawn of time. And then the man who's now Home Secretary put 4 exclamation marks. Get a grip and stop making fatuous arguments. You're better than this. I hadn't actually clocked James Cleverly believing that beans and bacon are capable of sentient thought that could be loosely described as patriotism. But as I write in my new book, How They Broke Britain, the calibre of candidate for the highest offices in the land has been brought lower than the lowest limbo bar in history by the need to appoint people who either believed or pretend to believe that Brexit would be a good idea. But there it is. Get a grip, he writes, and stop making fatuous arguments. You're better than this. Well, Home Secretary, you're clearly not. And what a tragedy that is. 13 minutes after 12 is the time. Are you going to have a patriotic lunch today? Patriotic 11s? What would constitute a patriotic breakfast or a patriotic snack? Possibly a custard cream with a Union flag painted onto it with icing. You'd eat that and you'd sort of oh, it's so patriotic and delicious. This inanimate food-based object is perfectly capable of holding, feeling and expressing emotions. I think sliced potatoes on a shepherd's pie, which Dan alluded to a moment ago. There is a dish that's like that, isn't there? It's a different. It's a Lancashire hot pot would be a shepherd's, not with mince. Well, anyway, I don't want to get involved. Anyway, unless you're the actual now Home Secretary, James Cleverly, the idea of being protective about sausages or patriotic beans is something that thankfully these islands have managed to rise above. Right, change of pace next. Nick Ferrari conducted an interview this morning, which I consider to be among the most harrowing of stories that we've ever heard on LBC. Over the years, we've built up such a bond of trust with our listeners that people are often prepared to share tales of heartbreak, suffering and woe. But the story that Susan Hall, the Conservative mayoral candidate for London, shared with Nick earlier today was all of those things. And I will not only share that story with you after these words, I will also then invite you to contribute to a phone-in conversation about people who have suffered similarly. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. So, obviously, we have a crack team here of producers and journalists, and some of them cultivate contacts with politicians and politicians' teams. And if you take a call, if Eleanor, for example, the producer of this alleged programme, were to take a call from a politician or a political candidate telling us that there is a story that needs to be shared, offering us an exclusive, on that story, and keen for us to provide a platform from which to share a tale of particular interest and intrigue. We would ordinarily give them a fair hearing. We'd be very interested, and that is what happened on LBC yesterday when the team of Susan Hall, the Conservative candidate, got in touch with LBC to reveal that she had been the victim of crime on London Underground, and she was keen to tell the story live on the radio in order, in part, to prove that her rival for the London mayoralty next year has presided over such a decline in standards in the city that the poor woman couldn't even travel on the London Underground safely. And it was to my friend and colleague Nick Ferrari that Susan Hall elected to tell this story earlier today.
You're about to hear from the Conservative mayoral candidate for London, Susan Hall, who has appeared on this programme, how she has been the victim of what she believes a robbery on the London Underground. It took place earlier this week, and here to join me and give us all the details, Susan Hall joins me. Thank you for coming on. Take us through the circumstances of what happened to you. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Well, I have to tell you I'm the luckiest woman in the world because I've actually got it back. But I just did a normal journey, and same thing with lots of people that are pickpocketed or whatever. You just get to the end of your journey and realise that you don't have your Oyster or your pass or whatever. And that's what happened to me, and I had no idea where it could have gone. I have very, very deep pockets in my winter coat, which I keep it in, or I kept it in. I will never do that again. I'll lock it in my handbag. It wasn't there. I had on one of the trains that I went on, somebody was fiddling around beside me and pushing and shoving, and I'd assumed that that's where it had gone. But when I got home, because in my Oyster card holder, I've also got my business card, somebody phoned me and said he'd seen somebody sitting on it. Most odd. He'd asked him if it was his. I know, I just don't get it. Asked him if it was his. He said, no, it wasn't. So he said, well, give it to me. So the chap took it and saw my number. So I'm very, very lucky.
Let's just get a couple of details here, if we may. Susan, where did you board the tube and where were you going?
Westminster, back to Pinner. So Jubilee line and then onto the Metropolitan line.
What sort of time of day was it?
Oh, this was mid-afternoon.
How crowded was the tube carriage?
Not like it is in the morning. I mean, people were standing, but...
and you get home, presumably, you go to get your oyster, presumably, to get off the train. That's when you go to you get off the train, you get to the barrier, and suddenly you realise you've been robbed.
Well, you realise it's not where it was, and you have no idea what's happened. And I mean, obviously, doing what I do, I know just how bad pickpocketing is on the Underground. It was the highest year ever last year. I was so cross with myself, Nick, because I thought, I should lock these things away in my handbag, and I certainly will in future. And I hope anybody listening does do that. Put it where, with a zipper over the top, so it can't be just taken out of a pocket.
So, Susan, you have your purse back minus what? Your Oyster card and your credit cards and cash? What's gone?
No, I don't keep credit cards in there. It's just literally the Oyster card and a business card, or a couple of business cards I keep in there. Right. So I'm very, very lucky, unlike many others.
So the Oyster card's gone and your cash has gone?
No, the Oyster card was still in there.
Oh, you've got everything.
I only keep the Oyster card in there. I see.
And the cash was still in there?
There was some cash in there, and that was still there.
So this is all credit to the bloke who saw what was going on and said, "Oi, is that your purse?" or whatever.
Well, he saw it. I wasn't there.
No, of course.
So the answer is I have no idea.
Okay.
I was very lucky. The British Transport Police phoned me last night, and I explained to them, because I was wading through their forms to try and report it when this very kind member of the public phoned. But
what does this mean for crime? Now, let's put this into a political aspect. What does this mean for crime for the regular Londoner trying to go about his or her job, trying to ride the Underground or the bus or indeed an overground train? And what does it mean for what you might bring to the dynamic were you to be successful next year?
Well, we've got to look at it. In Sneak Carnes, London, thefts are up 31%, robberies are up 58%. Last year was the highest year for pickpocketing on the Underground. So I'd say to your listeners, please, just make sure you keep everything very safe. I was furious with myself that it had gone, because I should lock these things away. But
the Mayor's office blames the Conservative government. They say that the police cuts hit London harder than any other parts of the UK, and that they need more officers and more funding as a result of Conservative cuts. Susan Hall.
Right. Well, I will say to you, the government gave them money for extra police officers, and the Metropolitan Police have had to give them back £60 million because they didn't recruit those officers. So it's very easy for Sadiq Khan to blame the government. The truth is the government gave them money for more officers and they didn't recruit them, so they've had to give the money back. There's still more police officers on our streets in London or employed by the Met than we've ever had before. Clearly, things are going very, very wrong in Sadiq Khan's London. We need to address crime as a number one subject, to be honest.
I apologise for not preceding that with a proper trigger warning. If you have been a victim of lost property that was subsequently returned to you completely intact as a consequence of both public-minded fellow citizens and the British Transport Police, then I can only imagine the flashbacks from which you will currently be suffering. So let's just run through the details of what we just heard. Susan Hall, the Conservative candidate for London Mayor, her Oyster card holder, which contained some cash and some business cards, fell out of her pocket while she was on the train, and the bloke who sat subsequently in the chair was sitting on her Oyster card holder. Someone else on the train noticed this and said, "Excuse me, do you notice that you're sitting on an Oyster card holder?" To which the chap replied, "Gosh, no." And the other fellow said, "Well, give it to me and I'll hand it into lost property." So he did. It still had all the money in it, still had the Oyster card in it, so if you wanted to steal a trip to Crystal Palace and back, you could have done. I suppose there's a slim possibility that she had encountered the world's worst pickpocketer who pickpockets and then left his spoils, his pickings, if you prefer, on full display to everybody else in public, even after his victim had left the carriage in question. But I don't think there's much mileage in that one. So what happened instead was it was then handed in to the British Transport Police, who found the phone number of the victim of Good Samaritanism and rang her up and told her. So that would be the point normally when you might let people know that possibly this isn't a story that you're going to come on the radio to talk about as evidence of all the criminality over which Sadiq Khan has presided as Mayor of London. But you noticed in the first moment, it's not often I find myself feeling sorry for Nick. But on this, because he certainly doesn't need my sympathy. But at the first moment, it could happen to any of us. You set up the interview and go, "So you are a victim of crime." To which the response is, well, either she's too silly to realise what she's been a victim of, which is public-spirited citizenship and effective policing, or she somehow thinks that she was pickpocketed, but she's got every single thing that was taken back. And that, I mean, is, in my view, one of the most wonderful things I have ever heard on the radio, and I think it would have been wrong of me not to share it with you. They're all trending as well, inevitably, on social media. So it fell out of her pocket. Babs is quick on the uptake. James, the only reason she lost her oyster is it fell out of her pocket. It was not stolen. She dropped it. She's pulling a fast one, if you ask me. Quite a few of you are wondering about what she might ingest as part of her leisure time habits. That is clearly not a path we can go down on this programme. And well, actually, quite a lot of you are doing that. And Jenny is very graciously admitting that, "Oh, James, you got me. I can't believe it." So how do we turn that into a phone-in? Well, you have listened to this programme for long enough to have faith in my ability to do so. And here's what I want to do. I do like that idea. I like the idea of somebody finding a lost wallet and not taking the money that is in it. Because even when you hear tales of relief at wallets being handed back in, and it's changed a bit, hasn't it, since we've got so many of our details now on our phone. It's changed quite a lot, that our life is no longer in our wallet. Some of us don't even carry wallets anymore because you can pay for everything with your phone. But in the days when everything was in your wallet, you were so grateful that your wallet had been recovered that you didn't mind that the recovery process had seen the 40 quid that was in it being liberated by somebody in the chain of recovery. And I love stories of people doing the right thing. I also love the stories about finding things you've lost. There should be a word for it. There probably is a German word for it. I must have told you before about the time I thought I'd lost my passport on the night before I was due to fly to America. And I was up. It was 3:45 in the morning. And I had searched absolutely everywhere that it could possibly be. And I was on the verge of phoning my then girlfriend to tell her I would not be able to come to America the next day, and I didn't have enough money to reshed. There would be all sorts of things going on. And my final act was to get every suitcase in the flat. I shared a flat at the time with a mate of mine. I got every item of luggage in the flat, and I stood on the sofa, unzipped every compartment, stood on the sofa in my flat. My mate was still up, bless him. He was helping me out. I was in a right state. And we just stood on the sofas, shaking furiously every item of luggage in the place, in the flat. And about the second or third last item of luggage, I kid you not, my passport just fluttered out. And that feeling right there is a feeling of such utter euphoria that it deserves a word of its own. Because you've got no right to feel euphoric. There's no reason why you should feel any happier upon discovering your passport than you did in the moments before you thought that you'd lost it. Your life has not changed. Here you are, confident that you possess a passport. Events occur, you realise perhaps you don't, your heart falls through the floor, you discover it, and the joy of discovery, the moment of happiness, right there, needs its own word, because it describes something utterly ridiculous. Your life has not changed in any way from 6 hours ago, but it's changed enormously from 6 minutes ago. And so that moment there. But here's what I want. I don't really want tales of lost wallets or tales of lost phones, because they're quite commonplace. I want two things. I want stories of the most physically enormous lost items that have been returned to you. So on this one, and it's theft, not robbery. Quite a few coppers are keen that I make that distinction. So she even got the words wrong, bless her. So the biggest thing that you've lost and had returned. Every year, London Underground reveal a remarkable list of things that have been left on trains. I'm always struck by prosthetic legs. You think, how could you not notice that you'd left your prosthetic leg on the train? And the answer is probably, well, it's not yours. You're carrying it somewhere for somebody else. So I think the jackpot here would be a cello or a double bass. So I spoke to Adam about this before we came on air. He was quite, I'm not going to lie to you, he poo-pooed the idea that anyone could lose a cello or a double bass. And I said, I once lost a bunch of sunflowers on the train, which aren't quite as big as a cello, I grant you, but the principle stands. You put it somewhere on public transport, either in the chair next to you or in some sort of luggage hold, and then you get to your destination and you've got your headphones on, or you're worried that you might miss your connection, you're in a bit of a tizzy, you hop off the train, you're only 5 yards away, but the doors have shut and the train has left, and you realise you've actually left the cello on the train. So can we get that back, please? 0345 6060 973. In terms of physical dimensions, the biggest thing, there's three elements to this phone-in. In terms of physical dimensions, the biggest lost and found that has ever happened, 0345 6060 973. The second thing that I want is the biggest financial value lost and found that we can find together, 0345 6060 973. And the third thing I want, and this doesn't have to be either big or valuable, but the trouble that somebody else has gone to, the unbelievable amount of trouble that somebody else has gone to reunite you with your belongings. That, because what Susan Hall has done is objectively hilarious, but at the same time, rather than using it as an example of what a wonderful city London is and how great it is to be in a town where if you are stupid enough to lose your Oyster card, somebody will not only find it and return it to you, but also resist the temptation to nick the £20 note out of the wallet that was in there. Rather than using it as something to celebrate, a rare nugget of good news in these blighted times, this ridiculous human being has tried to use it as evidence of crimes that didn't happen. So I like the stories of people going to enormous trouble to try and reunite you with your belongings. And hang on, I will accept children under belongings. All right? So possibly children might outplay cellos on this. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:37 is Stop sending me things that are even funnier than the story that started us off. 12:37 is the time, and the Conservative candidate for the London mayoralty has been raging against crime after she lost her wallet and had it returned fully intact by a concerned member of the public and the British Transport Police. So give me your tale of being reunited with something lost. But the bigger or the more valuable or the most effort that went into it are the things that I am looking for. Mark is in Hemel Hempstead. Mark, what have you got?
Hi, James. Story is, years ago when I was 18, I was working in a pub. I had a quite busy lunchtime trade. You know, when it clears out, you obviously go to the empty tables, take the glasses into the ashtrays, etc. So I went to this one table and I spotted a blue plastic carrier bag under it. And I was like, okay. Looked inside. It was a load of cash, a wad of cash. And counted it out. It was about £1,000.
Gosh.
So I took it to the manager and said, look, I found this here. And we were like, we were all quite like, wow, what the hell is going on there? Who's carrying around a wad of cash like that? So the manager said, leave it with me. I'll either report it to the police or bring it down to Lost and Found. I said, no problem at all. Carried on the shift. About 20 minutes later, someone came in asking for the carrier back. Yes, we found it. They were relieved.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't they?
The worry on their face when they came in, it was like, And, so we explained we've got it, handed it over to them. And, he gave me £20 out of it. Nice.
20 quid. Were you not remotely tempted at any point just to trouser it?
I was. Thought did cross my mind, to be fair, but I thought, you know what, it's going to put somebody else in a really precarious situation, losing that amount of cash.
You'd presume so. I mean, it sounds like he might have been involved in some sort of dodgy deal, to be honest, but that doesn't make the situation he might have ended up in any less precarious. And you trusted the manager as well, because the first thing that I thought then was the manager had nicked it off you, or nicked it off both of you.
I think the manager knew to do the right thing. The thing is with these pubs as well, we know that there's lots of CCTV, so it can be traced if needed.
That's a very good point. But
that's not the reason why I did the right thing.
I hear you. No, because you did the right thing because, like the person that helped out Susan Hall, your heart is in the right place. Did the person that you reunited with their £1,000 subsequently claim that they had been a victim of a terrible crime after they'd got the money back?
I don't think so. That was the last we heard of it when he took a £20 out. I said, look, thank you very much. I said, well, that's very nice of you. I was 18 at the time, so 20 quid back then was... He
didn't phone up LBC at that point and ask to come on air to tell the tale of his tragic loss?
No.
That's funny old world, isn't it? And just Susan Hall so far. Mark, take care. 12:39 is the time. Arend is in Norwich. Arend, what would you like to say?
Hello. My mum lost me.
Oh, dear. I mean, just to be clear, this does have a happy ending. You were reunited.
Oh yeah.
Oh, good. Carry on.
It's all lovely at the end.
Well, go on. What happened?
So I was 4 years old. Oh, hello, helicopter. I was 4 years old, and we were in the Netherlands visiting family. Went to the beach, and I, as a 4-year-old, ran up the beach chasing seagulls. Fell asleep and woke up, not knowing where my mum was. For about 4 hours, I was wandering around the beach. But a lovely lady kind of found me and started walking me back. But down the distance of the beach, we saw these 4 Range Rovers coming up, was picked up. But during that 4 hours, my mum was with lifeguards, and one of them sat her down and said, oh, by the way, 2 weeks ago, we actually found a 4-year-old. They drowned.
Oh, God, no. Your poor mother.
Yeah.
This isn't funny at all. Well, it is, because and were you stressed by it? Because I think the kid often in these tales is considerably less stressed than the adult.
Oh, yeah, I was having a great time.
Yes, exactly, playing in the dunes.
Yeah, wandering about, talking to people who I couldn't understand because everyone was speaking Dutch. But
you didn't know you were lost. Are you? I mean, there's a philosophical question for our times. If you don't know you're lost, are you actually lost?
Oh.
Who knows?
You could go into...
And after you were happily returned by hard-working public servants and concerned members of the public, did your mother then report the crime?
No, she didn't. She decided that she was very happy she'd just found me. But my Oma, my grandmother, she did kind of kick my mum for the next few months.
Yes,
you need to do something about this.
Well, it's not ideal behaviour, but I'm glad. I mean, to be fair, if your mother had followed Susan Hall's lead, she would have reported your abduction while holding your hand in the police station. It is 12:41. I like this one. Quite a few of you are making this joke, but I think this one is done. I want to find the person who's told it best. I'm not going to find it now, am I? So I can't give credit where credit is due. Oh, here it is. No, Daft's got it. I once left my kid in a pub, James, and didn't realise until I got home. Oh, no, hang on, that wasn't me. That was the Foreign Secretary. Judy's in Ipswich. Judy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I was really in dire straits during lockdown. We had no money. My husband and I were both self-employed. We had nothing.
Yeah.
And there was a debt. People writing to us and screaming for us.
Oh,
we
no.
managed to scrape £130 for this debt.
Yeah.
And because it was cash, I had to go to pay it in a bank.
Right.
So I went to the, I drove 3 miles to our town, went to one bank, they wouldn't take it, had to go back to my own bank and waited a massive long queue. And when I went to pay for it, it wasn't there.
Oh,
It
no.
had fallen out of my pocket. I had it in my pocket.
Well, you say
stupidly.
that. You were probably pickpocketed by Sadiq Khan.
But I stupidly had it in my back pocket. I was
Right.
convinced. I ran
you
up and down
silly
the
sausage.
market.
Yeah.
I spoke to the police. I spoke to lots of people. I cried my head off. I said, my husband's going to kill me. I have no money.
Oh,
and then he
God.
phoned me.
Yeah.
And he said, what are you doing walking up and down the market, chucking money away? And I went, what the hell are you talking about? He says, a man found the money because it was wrapped up in the debt letter.
Oh,
He
Lord.
found the money, saw our address, got on his motorbike and drove to our house to give us back the money.
Isn't that gorgeous?
It was the most wonderful thing. And I cried and I got onto Ipswich Suffolk Radio. I spoke to them. I put it all over Facebook to say thank you. My husband gave him a tenner. It was the most amazing thing.
But this is like, you remember in cartoons when you have a devil and an angel on your shoulders?
Yes.
This is what you and Susan Hall are. So you had
Yeah.
exactly the same experience, is that you lost your belongings, a concerned member of the public reunited you with your belongings, and you both rang a radio station.
Yeah, I ran Suffolk Radio and they just put it on there. If anybody knows who this person is, Judy says thank you. But I never heard from them.
But yours was an exercise in gratitude and decency, with exactly the same experience that Susan Hall used as an exercise in, well, disingenuousness at the very least, and how amazing that two women can have an almost identical experience and behave in two completely contradictory ways. That's a thing of beauty, Judy. I know who I'd rather be stuck in a hot air balloon with.
No, thank you.
You take care. Are we in a better place now? Are things?
God, yeah.
Oh, thank
Life
goodness
has
for
completely changed over now.
Happy days, and on we go. Thank you, Judy, and you take care. It's just coming up to 1:45. There is actually a worrying increase in online victims of real scams during the festive period, with shoppers losing over £10 million to cyber criminals in the last year. So it's obviously important to check that you have the basics in place when it comes to online security. This Wednesday, Sheila Fogarty will be talking to an ex-fraudster, Tony Sales, about the common protections you can take to protect yourself from cybercrime. This is important. That's this Wednesday with Sheila Fogarty, thanks to the National Cyber Security Centre. I'm James O'Brien. This is LBC. It's 12:45. 12:48 is the time. This is nice from Keith in Poland. James, the Streets, as in Mike Skinner, composed a best-selling album based on this topic. Keep up the good work. It was supposed to be so easy. Bit niche that, but he did do. It's a sort of concept album with two different endings. I really recommend it. It's called... Oh, flip it. A grand don't come for free. Unless, of course, you are a friend of a government minister trying to set up PPE contracts, in which case it would appear that several grands can come for free. And it is indeed to the COVID inquiry that we turn our attention next, because Fraser Knight has been keeping an eye on Michael Gove's testimony for us. Fraser, take it away.
It's been a really interesting morning, James, listening to Michael Gove. He started off by apologising for the mistakes that the government made, saying he, including other ministers, need to take their fair share of the blame for that. He admitted that we were too slow to lock down, as we've heard from a number of witnesses through this. And we were talking about Boris Johnson's decision-making. He said agreeing to a lockdown was so difficult for him because it went against all of his beliefs and his political ideologies in that. But he said the way that Boris Johnson used to make these decisions didn't always go down well in some of those Cobra meetings.
It's in the nature of the way that Boris Johnson worked that he wanted to see thesis, antithesis. That he preferred gladiatorial decision-making rather than inquisitorial. He wanted to see the two cases, or the three cases, rehearsed in front of him, or even rehearsed in his own mind.
But what was interesting is Michael Gove actually tried to take some of the blame away from individuals. He said that there were systemic failures, systemic issues in the heart of government, particularly in the Cabinet Office where he was the minister for at the time. He described it as being a bit like Mary Poppins' bag, where successive prime ministers would shove in was the term he used.
Michael Gove joke. Oh, Lord, stop it. You've got to give me warning, Fraser. Go on.
Well, he says, successive prime ministers used to shove in extra responsibilities there where it felt like there was nowhere else to put them easily. Now, of course, there has been a lot of conversation about Matt Hancock's role as the Health Secretary during the pandemic. We heard from the former head of NHS England describing him as having nuclear levels of confidence. But Michael Gove actually said this morning that he believed Matt Hancock was a good government minister.
I also have a high opinion of Matt Hancock as a minister. However, I believe that too much was asked of DHSC at that point, and it goes to the heart of one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. We should collectively have recognised that this was a Hill system crisis at an earlier point.
There were also questions to Michael Gove about some of the WhatsApp messages we've seen from Simon Case, the head of the civil service. Now, they said, I've never seen a bunch of people less well equipped to run a country, of course referring to the likes of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings in number 10. But Michael Gove defended them being there at the time, saying they were useful for other things.
Those strong personalities had been responsible for helping to secure not just an election victory, but an end to the logjam in Parliament over Brexit. And many of those strong personalities needed to be assertive in order to deal with some of the other challenges that we faced.
This is peak Michael Gove, isn't it? So he has apologised for the mistakes that were made and then defended absolutely everybody involved in the making of those mistakes.
Of those individual decisions, although he did, of course, accept that there were some mistakes there, and some of the messages from Michael Gove show that he was thinking that at the time as well. He said quite often people weren't happy when he was too forthcoming, but he accepted he probably should have been more forthcoming at that specific time.
But he's defending all of the people to whom he should have been more forthcoming. He's defending Matt Hancock, he's defending Boris Johnson, trying to sort of set him up as some sort of Hegelian pursuer of synthesis, and he's defending Dominic Cummings and the thugs that surrounded him as well.
I think it also comes back a bit to some of the evidence we heard from the likes of Lee Kane, the former communications director. You might remember he'd said that Boris Johnson had the wrong crisis in front of him for the skill set. So it's a bit of, give with one hand, take with another. It's apologising for the mistakes, accepting that we should have gone further, but also saying this is the way we worked and we had to do the best with what we had at the time. But Matt Hancock, of course, up in front of the inquiry later this week, and some of his close allies suggesting there'll be more bombshell evidence suggesting that actually some of his early warnings about the pandemic were ignored because number 10 said they were too busy dealing with Brexit.
That's interesting. So that's circular firing squad territory, but Gove has very much turned down any invitation to join in. It doesn't mean everybody... I mean, Cummings got going quite early on. He was prepared to take down anyone, really, except Michael Gove, oddly, but they've got a lot of history together. But so Hancock's going to try and exonerate himself while attacking Downing Street.
Well, a lot of the evidence we've heard so far is against Matt Hancock, so this will be his opportunity to respond to that, and it does sound like it could be quite fiery.
What's next? What's happening later today or later this week?
Jenny Harries is up this afternoon. Now, she, of course, was the former Deputy Chief Medical Officer. And then we have Sajid Javid and Dominic Raab tomorrow before Matt Hancock on Thursday and perhaps even on Friday as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Fraser Knight, keeping an eye on the COVID-19 inquiry for you and LBC. I'm trying to think of a Susan Hall joke off the back of that, but you don't need to, really, do you? They just write themselves, to be honest. Karen's in Wanstead. Back to the question of when is a crime not a crime, Karen, or when you were reunited with something of value that was either physically enormous, extremely valuable, or involved an unfeasible amount of effort on the part of the people that did the reuniting.
Hi, James.
Hello,
yeah, it was ages and ages ago when back in the day when you had proper cameras, and me and my husband went to Budapest for a break, and we cycled around the big park there. It was all really nice, took loads of pictures, and somewhere on that journey we lost the camera, so we retraced our steps, had a massive fallout because it was very precious to me at the time.
So you blamed him, did you?
Oh, yeah, it was his fault. He was carrying it.
Well,
it was always his fault.
Okay.
Yeah, so we went. So I stormed off to the police station, which was across town. Couldn't find it. Flew home, still not speaking to each other all the way on the plane.
Oh, crikey!
Yeah.
You really, when you get the hump, you really get the hump, don't you, Karen?
I'm a sulker, and yeah. So about a week later, the hotel that we were staying in phoned us and said that somebody had found the camera, and from the pictures on the camera, had seen which hotel we were staying at and handed it back into the hotel, and from whence it was reunited with us.
So you had to phone the divorce lawyers sharpish and tell them to relax.
Well, he's still on hold.
So it was a particularly valuable camera then, was it?
Oh, I don't know. I think,
or just sentimental value as much as anything else. Yeah. But someone actually developed the photographs, or was it digital?
It was digital.
Oh, so they could see the pictures on the back of it and work out where you'd stayed and then take it back. That's just lovely, isn't it?
Took it back to the hotel, and it wasn't even a park that was really close to the hotel. It was.
They've just worked it out, and then really sort of. And did you phone a radio station to report that you'd been a victim of a terrible crime?
I didn't actually.
Oh, okay. It's just Susan Hall then.
No, not Susan Hall, I'm afraid.
Well, we'll find one eventually who has lost something, been reunited with it, and reported it as a terrible crime on national radio. We will before. Well, we've got 2.5 minutes. Is it going to be Fergus in Dundee? Fergus, what happened?
Hi, James. Thanks for hosting such a wholesome phone-in.
It has been wholesome, actually. That's a great word. That's not a word I'd use often, but it has been a wholesome phone-in today.
Wholesome, very wholesome. Yeah, so I didn't blame anyone for this. I left my bass guitar on a train. As soon as you mentioned double basses, I thought, Christ, I should probably call in.
That's quite big.
Big, and I had a pedal board as well, so it's a big thing to lug around. I had this thing for about 10 years, 1,000 gigs down. I got into the car with my sister who offered to give me a lift back home after the train, and she said, "Where's your bass guitar?" And my heart just dropped. I had this thing for 1,000 gigs, travelled the world with this thing, and I ran back, and the train had got to Waverley and then headed back to Glasgow, and I thought, oh God, what am I going to do?
Never going to see it again.
National Rail. Never going to see it again. Called National Rail a bunch of times, and it was my birthday the next day. The worst birthday ever, just worrying about this thing. Called the train station again and again and again, got nothing back. And then 3 days later, my wonderful brother, Max, turned up at my door with my bass guitar. And it was just such a wonderful thing.
He'd gone to it had been handed in at Glasgow, had it? Or...
Yeah, well, it must have been handed in at Waverley, but no, I called and they said, no, it's not here, and he just went off on his own and got it, and fantastic. Such a wonderful thing to...
Did you phone, what would be 4th FM, would it, back in those days, to report this terrible crime?
I did not.
That's just Susan Hall, then. It's the strangest thing, isn't it?
It's so weird, isn't it?
Strangest thing. Fergus, take care. Are you still playing?
Thanks, James. Yeah, definitely.
Carry on. 12:50. Should we squeeze in one more just for fun? Because it might be that Martin at Heathrow, very quickly.
Oh, hello, mate. Thanks for putting me on. Do you remember the old Daily Mirror building on Holborn Circus?
Of course I do. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, when it closed down, I'm a London cab driver, and there was this guy in a yellow jacket who flagged me down. And he got in the cab, and he was an archaeologist from the Museum of London.
Oh yeah.
And he said, I've just unearthed this cremation pot from AD 66.
Fantastic.
And I thought, what? It's Roman, it was Roman, and it was I said, how do you know it was AD 66?
Good question.
Said, well, because it's got a copper line at the top of that, and that's known as the Bodatian line.
Good Lord.
When Boadicea came and burnt down. So I dropped him off at the Museum of London.
Yeah.
Went on my merry way. And I went down, I was going down London Wall, and I picked up this German guy. He gets in the cab and he says, oh, hello, I want to go to Heathrow, but someone has left an old pot in the back of your cab.
Did he grow up in Cardiff?
What? So basically, we bombed down London. I told this German guy all about it.
We're on a mission.
We got to I was on a mission, and when we got to the Museum of London, this archaeologist, he was just standing there crying his eyes out.
Oh, what a great tale.
I handed him the pot, and he was like, oh, thank you so much. He gave me a hug and everything.
I haven't got time for another one. We'll do that next time. Susan Hall loses something, has it returned by a concerned member of the public, and decides to tell national radio that she's been the victim of a terrible crime. And I'll tell you what, being passingly familiar with her career so far, I wouldn't bet against it happening again. That is it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back to the whole show podcast on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as staying up to date with the latest news from LBC. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, which you can download for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. If you're coming to Manchester tonight, I shall see you later. Otherwise, Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, and Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
I'm not sure it quite tops that guy's story, but I was left at nursery aged 4.5 when my entire family moved house and I was not picked up from nursery.
I love the moment of realising that's Home Alone. That's Kevin, isn't it? Sheila!
I actually walked to the new house with my aunties, as I call them, in nursery, and my mum answered the door and said in true Irish fashion, Jesus, Mary and Holy St. Joseph.